Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we drift through time to an age where civilization itself wakes up in the muddy palms of twin rivers. Imagine the crackle of reeds brushing your ankles, dragonflies zipping overhead, and the wet squelch of barefoot steps on warm silt. The air is thick with the perfume of standing water and fresh-baked bread. You hear the distant clang of copper tools, smell the soot of charcoal fires, and glimpse smoke curling above clustered huts. Down here in southern Mesopotamia, humans aren't just surviving anymore, they're inventing cities. But let's be honest, they probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all begins in the 4th millennium BCE. Southern Mesopotamia is not exactly prime real estate. It's swampy, scorching in summer, occasionally flooded to the point of biblical proportions. And yet, somehow, it draws humans like a magnet. Why? Because of rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates, twin serpents of fresh water, deposit silky, fertile mud during their floods. It's not the prettiest landscape, but it's the ancient equivalent of a free buffet. So people start to settle. They ditch the old nomadic routine and dig in. At first, these are tiny villages, clusters of reed huts, a few goats bleating in the distance, and communal ovens baking flatbread under the sun. But over generations, something starts to shift. Villages expand, then fuse, and before long, they begin morphing into proper cities. And not just any cities, these are the first cities in human history. Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, Lagash, and Kish. These names sound like they were invented for a fantasy novel, and honestly, they might as well have been. Uruk especially is the superstar here. Around 3500 BCE, it balloons into a bustling metropolis of perhaps 40,000 people. That may not sound like much today, but in a world where most humans still live in tiny clans, it's staggering. It's also where we get the word urban. Yep, Uruk literally gave us the term for city life. The first urban jungle was more reeds than concrete, but still, it's where civilization starts putting on pants. These cities don't just pop up randomly. They cluster near the rivers and then they dig. Canals, irrigation ditches, levees. They transform flood-prone wetlands into checkerboards of farmland. Agriculture booms, and with it comes a domino effect. Extra food means not everyone has to be a farmer, so for the first time people specialise. Some become potters, others are blacksmiths, weavers, bakers and merchants. Suddenly there's an economy, and with it, inequality. Because of course someone's going to notice that the guy with 800 sheep seems a lot fancier than the one with 3. Religion also steps up its game. Temples evolve from little huts into monumental platforms called ziggurats. These aren't just pretty buildings, they dominate the skyline, massive terraced towers built from sun-dried bricks. Each city has one, and it becomes the heartbeat of everything. Economically, spiritually, politically, everything revolves around the temple. It's where you take your grain to be blessed and taxed. It's where the gods supposedly live, although good luck catching them at home. And it's where the priests rule. That's right. Before kings, there were temple priests. These guys hold all the keys. They control the food surplus, manage the irrigation networks, and mediate between mortals and gods. And in a society obsessed with divine favour, that's basically a power monopoly. Eventually the priesthood will start to blur into royalty, but in these early days you're more likely to be bossed around by someone in a ceremonial beard than someone with a crown. Social classes start to calcify. At the top, the priests and elites, living in multi-room mud brick homes with private courtyards and surprisingly decent plumbing. In the middle, traders, artisans and scribes, the latter of whom will become weirdly powerful thanks to a new invention we'll meet later. At the bottom, farmers, labourers, and slaves, mostly war captives or debtors, forced to work the fields or grind grain for someone else's feast. Still, even if life at the bottom is tough, it's undeniably stable, something prehistoric people could only dream of. These new cities have granaries, wells, public squares, marketplaces, even proto-bureaucracies. Imagine a man with a reed stylus checking a list while goats bleat impatiently behind him. That's Mesopotamian red tape, and it's glorious. But here's the twist. None of these city-states get along. Each Sumerian city has its own patron deity, its own calendar, its own ziggurat, and most importantly its own ambitions. They bicker constantly. Sometimes it's over water rights, because canal maintenance is the ancient version of internet arguments. Sometimes it's over borders or stolen goods. Sometimes it's just personal. Historians still argue whether these city-states ever truly united in peace, or if their occasional alliances were more like awkward family dinners, tense, temporary, and destined to fall apart. Yet despite the squabbling, something remarkable is happening. Culture is blooming. Artisans sculpt intricate votive statues with wide, staring eyes. Musicians play lyres, drums, and reed flutes in temple courtyards. Architects lay out straight streets and residential quarters. And in the background, always, the rivers murmur on, both life-givers and destroyers depending on the season. Oh, and did I mention the bricks? Because Mesopotamia doesn't have much stone or timber, people get wildly creative with mud. They bake it, dry it, stamp it, and use it to build everything. Homes, walls, temples, even street signs. Over time, they invent moulds to standardise brick sizes. If you've ever stubbed your toe on a Lego, you've experienced Sumerian architecture and spirit. Now, every civilization needs a bit of weird, and the Sumerians deliver. Take Eridu, one of the oldest cities. Its temple is rebuilt over and over again, layer upon layer, for over 1,500 years. Some scholars believe it represents the first sacred space ever created. Others think it was just an excuse for priests to keep expanding their real estate. Either way, that much rebuilding shows serious devotion, or serious zoning issues. And then there's the legend of the Abzu, a watery underworld supposedly accessible through temple basements. Priests believed this subterranean ocean was where creation began. Rituals were performed to connect with it, usually involving pouring water into special drains. It's as if they believed their basements could call the gods, spiritual plumbing at its finest. Yet even as these cities thrive, the cracks begin to show. Deforestation and over-irrigation start to mess with the land. Salt creeps into the soil, reducing crop yields. Rainfall patterns shift, possibly because of broader climate cycles. The land that once overflowed with barley starts to sputter. But for now, that's still on the horizon. In this moment, Sumerian civilization is just hitting its stride. They're inventing new tools, shaping belief systems, and scratching their stories into the very clay beneath their feet. They don't know it yet, but they're laying down the blueprint for urban life, a template that echoes in every city skyline, traffic jam, and zoning ordinance to this day. And it all began with mud, hope, and the shimmering promise of a river. By the time the sun rises over the rooftops of Uruk, casting long shadows across sun-baked alleys, something new begins to dominate the skyline. Something not quite a palace, and not quite a mountain, but reaching confidently toward the heavens, the ziggurat. These architectural wonders rise tier by tier, made of millions of mud bricks carefully stacked into giant terraced platforms. At the summit, usually, sits a temple, dedicated to the city's patron god or goddess. But make no mistake, these structures aren't just fancy prayer podiums, they're statements, monumental, back-breaking, tax-devouring statements. A ziggurat tells every visitor, every rival city-state, and every doubtful citizen exactly who's in charge, both divine and human. Uruk's ziggurat, built for Inanna, the fierce goddess of love, war, and possibly sass, is among the earliest and most elaborate. Workers labour under a punishing sun, hauling bricks in wicker baskets, guided by overseers with reeds tucked behind their ears like ancient pencils. Each layer is stacked with almost mathematical precision. Stairs zigzag up the front like a ladder to Olympus. Coloured tiles, rare stones, and glinting cones of copper line the outer walls, turning the tower into a shimmering mirage against the desert haze. It's hard to exaggerate how impressive these things are, especially considering the tools involved. No iron, no pulleys, no cranes, just human backs, clever engineering, and a lot of trial and error. And yet, despite the sweat and blisters, the cities keep building them, higher and more extravagantly each time. Because a bigger ziggurat means a more powerful god. And a more powerful god? Well, that means more rain, more grain, more winning in battle, hopefully. Inside, the temple isn't crowded with worshippers. Sumerian religion is more bureaucratic than evangelical. Priests conduct rituals, offer food and incense, read omens from sacrificed animals, and perform sacred duties in relative privacy. Lay people worship from afar, watching, donating, and occasionally joining in festivals that feature music, dance, and likely a few inebriated goat races. What's fascinating is how the priesthood becomes a kind of proto-government. They're not just leading prayers, they're managing land, storing grain, organising trade and maintaining records. These ziggurats aren't just temples, they're command centres. Vaults, archives and distribution centres are nestled within their base complexes. Think of them as the world's first combination city hall and megachurch. This leads to an inevitable question. Where are the kings? In the very beginning, they don't exist. At least not in the way we think of them. Power lies with temple officials and councils of elders. But soon, as cities grow, threats increase and wealth accumulates, it becomes clear that someone needs to make fast decisions. A single figure who can lead in war, negotiate in peace, and, let's be honest, take credit for the good times. So enters the Lugal, or big man. At first, these war leaders are probably elected in times of crisis. But surprise, surprise, once power is tasted, it rarely goes back in the box. Before long, Lugal becomes a title for kings, and they start building palaces next to the ziggurats. Not quite gods, but definitely acting like they have divine voicemail. And while priests might still have divine legitimacy, kings have soldiers, walls, and taxes. The dynamic is complex, sometimes cooperative, sometimes tense. Historians still argue whether kings were truly independent of temples or just high-ranking priests in military cosplay. What's clear is that both institutions become central to how cities function, and both love to record every detail of their supremacy on giant stone steles. One of the earliest such kings is a man named Emma-Barajesi of Kish. We don't know much about him, but his name appears in both archaeology and myth, always a promising combo. Later stories claim he conquered Elam, Sumer's pesky neighbour to the east, and ruled with wisdom and might. He also shows up in the Sumerian king list, a wild document that mixes real rulers with those who allegedly reigned for 36,000 years. It's less a history book and more an ancient version of Who's Who, with a few time travellers thrown in. As kings solidify their rule, city-states start flexing their muscles beyond their own canal networks. Wars become common, short, sharp, and usually over water or trade routes. Each city builds its own walls, arms its own militia, and commissions propaganda in the form of carvings that show enemies being trampled by divine animals or pierced by javelins in impressive poses. In Lagash, one ruler named Ianatum commissions a limestone stele now known as the Stele of the Vultures. It shows his soldiers marching in formation, his enemies torn apart by birds, and his god Ningirsu overseeing the carnage. Subtle, it is not, but effective, absolutely. These monuments are meant to inspire awe, fear, and maybe a bit of civic pride, like a brutal billboard. Meanwhile, the cities themselves continue to evolve. Homes are grouped into neighbourhoods, sometimes around shared courtyards. There are workshops, taverns, and open-air markets where vendors hawk fish, dates, copper tools, and colourful textiles. The air is filled with the chatter of haggling, the clink of weights on scales, and the occasional shouted curse when a sheep escapes its pen. At night, the city glows gently with oil lamps. People gather on rooftops to cool off, eat flatbread, sip beer, and watch the stars. It's here, perhaps, that someone first notices the patterns in the sky, the slow crawl of planets, the flicker of distant constellations. The ziggurats with their height and purpose likely serve as early observatories. Over time, stargazing becomes not just a pastime, but a science, and naturally a form of divine communication. This obsession with the stars leads to one of Sumer's great legacies, early astronomy. They divide the sky into recognisable zones, track the movements of celestial bodies, and develop a lunar calendar that helps regulate planting and festivals. It's a slow process, full of errors and revisions, but it plants the seeds for later Babylonian and even Greek advancements. But even down here on Earth, something remarkable is shifting. People begin to leave behind their oral traditions and start recording thoughts in physical form, not just as pictures, but as symbols. Symbols that evolve slowly and awkwardly into a revolutionary system, writing. But before we dive into cuneiform and the scribes who wield it like wizards, let's linger a bit longer on the cultural stew brewing in these cities. Music is everywhere. Small harps, flutes, drums, and something called a bull lyre create a soundtrack of daily life. The lyre itself is often decorated with golden animal heads and inlaid shells, ornate enough to suggest that music isn't just entertainment, but a vital part of ritual and ceremony. And speaking of ceremony, Festivals. The Sumerians love a good festival. These are rowdy affairs dedicated to various gods, especially Inanna, who seems to delight in chaos. There's feasting, drinking, theatrical reenactments, and possibly some slightly scandalous rituals. One such ritual is the sacred marriage, where the king symbolically marries the goddess, usually through a priestess stand-in to ensure fertility and cosmic order. Scholars debate how literal this got, but let's just say it was considered a crowd pleaser. Meanwhile, trade is exploding. Sumer has lots of grain, wool, and finished goods, but few natural resources, so they trade. Boats paddle up the rivers, laden with goods. Caravans cross deserts with donkeys loaded down like shopping carts. In return, Sumer gets timber from the Zagros Mountains, copper from Oman, and lapis lazuli from what's now Afghanistan, each item a small miracle in its own right. These long-distance exchanges mean Sumer isn't isolated. It's plugged into a vast network, and its ideas, art, writing, religion, start to ripple outward. Its influence begins to stretch far beyond the marshes and canals where it was born. But amid all this expansion, something quiet is happening in dim rooms off temple courtyards and palace halls, something that will change everything. A scribe picks up a stylus and presses it into wet clay. The sound is soft, almost imperceptible, a gentle squish as the sharpened reed tip presses into the clay. It doesn't seem like much, but this act, repeated thousands of times by thousands of hands, becomes the foundation of written civilization. This is the birth of cuneiform, and with it the dawn of recorded thought. At first, writing isn't about poetry or philosophy. It's about sheep, and beer, and counting. The earliest cuneiform tablets are not stirring epics or cosmic revelations. They're receipts, lists, inventory tallies scratched into clay by temple bureaucrats trying to keep track of how many goats have been offered, how many jars of barley have been distributed, how many labourers showed up on Tuesday. It's logistics, not literature, but it's also revolutionary. To understand how it begins, imagine a little clay ball called a bulla, filled with tiny clay tokens. Each token represents a quantity of a commodity, a cone for barley, a disc for sheep, a cylinder for oil. These are sealed inside the ball, and symbols are pressed onto the outside to describe the contents. Soon, someone has a clever idea. Why not skip the tokens and just draw the symbols directly onto a tablet? And so it begins. The earliest symbols are pictographs, simple images. A fish looks like a fish. A star looks like a star. But as commerce grows more complex, so does the writing. Over time, pictures morph into abstract marks, and the stylus shifts from drawing to pressing wedge-shaped impressions into the clay. Thus, the script becomes cuneiform, literally wedge-shaped. It's not intuitive. It takes years to learn, but it works. Clay becomes the preferred medium. It's cheap, abundant, and when dried or baked, surprisingly durable. Scribes, usually male, though there are exceptions, train in special schools called adubus, or tablet houses. These are grueling institutions where students memorize long lists of signs, practice until their wrists ache, and endure the occasional beating for sloppy work. The Sumerians are passionate about two things: bureaucracy and discipline. Eventually, the script evolves beyond simple transactions. It begins to capture contracts, legal decisions, personal letters, hymns, and, perhaps most famously, epic tales. And nowhere does that epic tradition shine brighter than in the tale of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of Uruk, becomes the unlikely hero of the world's first great literary masterpiece. His story is preserved on a series of tablets and stitched together over centuries. Though later versions come from Akkadian and Babylonian hands, its roots are unmistakably Sumerian. The tale is strange, moody, and deeply human. It begins with Gilgamesh as a tyrant, part god, part man, all arrogance. His people pray for relief, and the gods respond by creating Enkidu, a wild man raised by animals, meant to challenge Gilgamesh. After an epic brawl, the two become inseparable friends. Together they slay monsters, insult gods, and generally behave like a mythological buddy comedy. But then Enkidu dies, and everything changes. Gilgamesh is shattered. For the first time, the king who thought himself invincible confronts death. He abandons his city, his crown, and his pride to seek immortality. His journey takes him to the ends of the earth, through scorpion-guarded gates, across oceans of death, to a distant survivor of a great flood, Utnapishtim, who holds the secret of eternal life. Yes, that flood. The story bears a haunting resemblance to later tales in the Hebrew Bible, including Noah's Ark. A god grows angry. A flood wipes out mankind. One man is warned in time, builds a boat, saves animals, and lives to tell the tale. Whether this Sumerian version inspired later myths is still debated, but the parallels are too close to ignore. It's one of the many ways Sumer whispers through history, barely noticed but ever present. In the end, Gilgamesh fails to secure immortality. He returns to Uruk, wiser but heartbroken. The tale closes not with a victory, but with acceptance. His true legacy, he realizes, is not eternal life, but the walls he built, the city he ruled, and the stories told in his name. It's an astonishingly modern message. Legacy is not in escaping death, but in what we leave behind. Back in the tablet houses, scribes continue to press their styluses into clay. The writing becomes denser, more elaborate. Grammatical structures emerge. Sumerian itself is a language isolate, no known relatives, but it's filled with delightful quirks. Word order is flexible. There are many words for to give. And gender gets very creative, which brings us to the gods. Sumerian religion isn't just a pantheon. It's a sprawling, often contradictory soap opera with divine politics, cosmic rivalries, and a lot of thunderbolts. At the top is An, the sky god, silent, distant, a kind of divine chairman who rarely shows up for meetings. Then there's Enlil, the god of air, storm and command. He's powerful, impatient, and once banishes humanity for being too noisy. Classic Enlil. His half-brother Enki, the water god, is far more relaxed, clever, subversive, and a frequent saviour of mortals. If Enlil is the strict principal, Enki is the chill science teacher sneaking you snacks. But the star of the Sumerian pantheon is undoubtedly Inanna, goddess of love, or fertility, justice, and probably online drama if it existed. Inanna is dazzling, unpredictable, and utterly compelling. Her symbols include the lion, the planet Venus, and the 8-pointed star. She's equally comfortable in battle armour or flowing robes, equally likely to seduce or smite. One of her most famous myths, Inanna's Descent, tells of her journey to the underworld to visit her sister Ereshkigal. She passes through 7 gates, removing a piece of clothing or jewellery at each one. By the time she arrives, she's stripped bare, literally and symbolically. There she dies, is hung on a hook, and only returns through Enki's clever intervention. Scholars still argue over the meaning. Is it a fertility cycle, a political allegory, a cosmic prank? Whatever the answer, it's powerful. Inanna returns changed, stronger, and just a little scarier. She also inspires poetry, lush, passionate hymns that celebrate her beauty, her rage, her love affairs with mortal kings. These aren't dry rituals. They're sensual, musical, sometimes spicy enough to make even modern readers blush. And they're some of the earliest examples of human emotion committed to writing. Thanks to cuneiform, we also know about Sumerian math and science. They use a base 60 number system. Yes, that's why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. Their geometry isn't abstract, it's practical, used for surveying fields, dividing land, and constructing temples. Medicine is another realm of recorded knowledge. Tablets detail diagnoses, prescriptions, and incantations. A headache might be treated with herbs, or with a prayer to a god who's allegedly angry. They don't quite separate the natural and the supernatural. If you're sick, it might be because you angered a spirit, or because you drank canal water. Either way, you're getting an onion poultice and a chant. Cuneiform tablets cover nearly every aspect of life. There are marriage contracts, complete with divorce clauses, wills and testaments, school exercises where students copy the same proverb 100 times, proof that ancient homework was just as tedious. There are even jokes, riddles, and insults. One fragment reads, "You're the kind of person who bathes in dirty water and thinks it's perfume." Ouch. But perhaps the most poignant tablets are personal letters, brief, clumsy, occasionally misspelled. One reads, "Tell my mother I am well. Tell my brother to send figs. Also, the silver is missing." It's so familiar, so deeply human, that you can almost hear the author muttering while he writes. Through cuneiform, the Sumerians leave behind not just records, but voices. Voices that echo across millennia. some loud like kings and priests, others quiet, a merchant's note, a child's schoolwork, a farmer's list of sheep. Together they form the first true library of human thought. And it all began with a wedge pressed into clay. The midday heat in Uruk presses down like a heavy blanket, rippling the air above the brick-paved streets. A trader wipes sweat from his brow as he hauls a basket of dates toward the marketplace. Somewhere in the distance a lyre plucks a mournful tune, and in the heart of the temple district scribes carefully copy a tale that's already old, the saga of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, the restless king, the builder of mighty walls, the seeker of immortality, continues to haunt the Sumerian imagination long after his actual rule, if he ever truly reigned at all. His story becomes not just a piece of entertainment, but a vessel for spiritual, philosophical, and political musings, and woven within it is one of the most compelling myths ever written, the Great Flood. This flood doesn't just pop up in the middle of the epic for dramatic effect. It appears in the 11th tablet of the later Akkadian version, but even earlier versions preserve the same bones of the story. The gods decide to exterminate humanity. One man, Utnapishtim, is warned by a sympathetic deity and told to build a massive boat. He does. He survives. After the waters recede, he offers a sacrifice, and the gods, suddenly remorseful, reward him with eternal life. Sound familiar? Yes. Long before Noah set sail, the Sumerians were already pondering cataclysmic deluges. Whether this was rooted in actual flood events from the unpredictable Tigris and Euphrates is still debated. Some archaeologists point to flood layers in ancient cities. Others argue it's a symbolic retelling of rebirth through destruction. Either way, it sticks. The motif echoes through Babylonian, Hebrew, Greek, and even Indian traditions. Sumer may be gone, but its dreams of drowning and survival ripple through time. But Gilgamesh's story doesn't end with the flood. After his encounter with Utnapishtim and his failure to gain eternal life, he returns to Uruk. Defeated, yes, but transformed. He gazes upon his city's walls, those very walls he once believed would outlive him, and finally understands. Legacy lies not in living forever, but in what we build and leave behind. That idea, so potent, so melancholy, seeps into Sumerian culture. You see it in their relentless building projects, their meticulous records, their obsession with order. These people know their time is fleeting, but they're determined to be remembered, even if only as a name pressed into clay. And then there's the strange brilliance of their religion, which, as mentioned earlier, makes the Marvel universe look underdeveloped. Inanna, still the unpredictable Queen of Heaven, plays a starring role in several tales that are more psychological than mythological. One lesser-known episode sees her planting a magical tree in her garden, hoping to turn it into a throne and a bed. But when the time comes to harvest it, she discovers it's infested, home to a serpent, a screech owl, and a rebellious demon. She cries out for help, but no one answers, until Gilgamesh himself swoops in and saves the day. It's a curious tale, part creation myth, part early superhero crossover, and it shows just how entangled their myths become. Gods and mortals mingle freely. Heroes can rescue goddesses. Goddesses can destroy kings. It's myth, yes, but also an allegory for power, how easily it shifts, how often it surprises. Another myth tells of Dumuzid, Inanna's shepherd lover. After returning from the underworld, she finds him lounging on her throne, completely failing to mourn her absence. She's not impressed. In fact, she's furious, and like any scorned goddess, she condemns him to take her place in the underworld. Dumuzid pleads, runs, is betrayed by his own sister, and ultimately dragged down. Yet even here, the story doesn't end. A deal is struck. He will spend half the year below, and his sister the other half. Sound like anything else? That's right. This is one of the earliest versions of the seasonal myth, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth that later appears in the Greek tale of Persephone. Scholars still debate whether the Greek version borrows directly from the Sumerians, or if these myths arise independently, but the resonance is eerie. Once again, Sumer's fingerprints are all over the foundations of later civilizations. These myths aren't just campfire stories, they're frameworks. They teach, caution, comfort, and entertain. And because they're written down, they evolve more slowly, more deliberately than oral traditions. A tale etched in clay doesn't change as easily as one passed by word of mouth. The preservation of these stories also owes much to temple institutions. Temples, as mentioned before, aren't just religious centres, they're cultural hubs. Within their storerooms are not just grain and offerings, but shelves upon shelves of tablets. In some cases, these archives are so vast that later archaeologists would find thousands of tablets piled together, some still awaiting translation. This combination of bureaucracy and belief leads to an explosion in literary forms. Beyond myths, there are proverbs, the liar's tongue grows long, wisdom texts, legal codes, political propaganda, and even something resembling student debates. One particularly delightful genre features dialogues between personified objects, like a hoe arguing with a plough or a bird mocking a fish. It's quirky, satirical, and deeply human. And of course, they love a good list. The Sumerians are list makers par excellence. Gods, kings, professions, cities, plants, animals, stars, everything is categorized, not necessarily for efficiency, but for mastery. To name something is to know it, and to know it is, in some sense, to control it. Among the most enduring of these is the Sumerian King List, an odd document that blurs the line between history and fantasy. It begins with rulers said to have reigned for tens of thousands of years before the flood. After that, reign lengths start to sound a bit more reasonable, though still generously inflated. What's intriguing is how this list doesn't shy away from acknowledging abrupt regime changes. Then kingship moved to Ur. Then kingship was taken to Izin. The idea that authority is mobile, that it can shift from city to city like a sacred torch, suggests a political flexibility rarely seen in later empires. And speaking of cities, each one has its own flavour. Uruk is cosmopolitan, artistic, and religiously intense. Lagash is fiercely militaristic, proud of its victories. Nippur serves as a neutral religious capital, sacred to Enlil, where warring cities might send ambassadors to negotiate or sulk. And then there's Eridu. Eridu may be the oldest of them all. According to myth, it's the first city ever founded, blessed by the gods themselves. Its temple to Enki, the trickster god of wisdom and water, is rebuilt again and again, layer upon layer, spanning over a millennium. Excavations show temple after temple stacked like time pancakes, each preserving the memory of the one before. There's a quiet reverence in that, an acknowledgement that even as bricks crumble, the sacred endures. But these cities aren't isolated. They squabble, yes, but they also interact, through trade, through diplomacy, and through shared stories. A myth written in Uruk might echo in Lagash a generation later. A hero from Kish might end up immortalized in a hymn sung in Nippur. The borders between them are real, but porous, and through it all the clay tablets keep accumulating. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. Some beautifully inscribed, others scrawled with the desperation of someone writing just before a fire. They preserve not just the big stories, but the tiny ones, the contracts, the chores, the jokes, the complaints. One reads, "Why have you not come? Is there some reason you will not visit me? You said you would come, and yet I wait." It's not dated, but it could have been written yesterday. Through these remnants we glimpse the texture of daily life. A merchant planning a caravan, a farmer arguing over irrigation rights, a widow filing for inheritance, a teacher marking a student's tablet with frustration, and always, behind it all, the thrum of the ziggurat, the glow of oil lamps, the slow shuffle of scribes. By now, Sumer has become more than a collection of cities. It's an identity, a shared language, a style of governance, belief, and storytelling. It's not an empire, not yet, but it's a world, complex, contradictory, brilliant, and deeply human. Before the sun has even peaked above the horizon, the temple courtyards are already humming, fires are stoked, bread dough is kneaded, and priests in long fringed robes begin preparations for the morning rituals. Among the first offerings placed before the gods, barley. And with that barley comes one of the oldest and most beloved human inventions, beer. In Sumer, beer is not a luxury. It's a staple. It's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's safer than water, richer than gruel, and quite possibly the only reason labourers agree to work 12-hour shifts hauling mud bricks. Children drink it. Elders drink it. Gods are offered it. It's so central to daily life that one of the earliest written texts is, naturally, a beer recipe. Made from fermented barley bread, Sumerian beer is cloudy, thick, and consumed through long straws to avoid floating bits of chaff. It's not served in pints, but in large communal vessels. big clay jugs sloshing with frothy, slightly sour brew. People gather around them like bees at a honeypot. Sipping from the same vessel isn't just practical, it's symbolic. A sign of shared labour, shared joy, and shared mild intoxication. The goddess of beer even gets her own deity, Ninkasi. Her hymn, part prayer, part instruction manual, describes every step of brewing from soaking the grain to fermenting the mash. It's the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a hip brewery taproom, except it's from 1800 BCE. Sumerians view beer not just as nourishment, but as civilization in liquid form. One myth claims that humans didn't truly become human until they drank beer. The wild man Enkidu, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, is only considered civilized after consuming bread and beer. He drank 7 jars of beer, and his heart grew light, the text declares. Who among us cannot relate? Grain production underpins the entire economy. Fields stretch in carefully measured rectangles, fed by meticulously maintained canals. Irrigation is everything here. Without it, the land turns to dust. With it, barley grows tall and fat, ready to be ground into flour or brewed into beer. And where does all that grain go? To the temples, of course. Temples function as central economic hubs, collecting grain as tax or tribute and redistributing it according to complex rationing systems. Workers, whether priests, artisans or field hands, are often paid in barley or beer. Records show precise allotments. So many litres for a carpenter, slightly more for a foreman, even specific rations for women and children. It's not wage labour in the modern sense, but it's startlingly organised. At the heart of this system is the temple bureaucracy. Dozens of scribes track incoming harvests, outgoing distributions and surplus reserves. The math is sophisticated, units are standardised, fields are measured and remapped annually. It's agriculture, yes, but it's also accounting. Lots and lots of accounting, and surrounding it all is a rich spiritual framework. The grain isn't just food, it's sacred. The harvest is a divine gift, overseen by a complex pantheon of agricultural deities, Ashnan, goddess of grain, and her sister Lahar, goddess of cattle, even Star in a myth where they bicker over which of them is more essential. Spoiler, they're both essential, but Ashnan wins the argument. Because frankly, you can survive longer without steak than without bread. The Sumerians have a deeply animistic view of the world. Every object, force, and concept has a divine essence. Trees, rivers, tools, even abstract ideas like truth or justice are personified and revered. It's a world crowded with spirits, and they're not all friendly. Bad luck might be caused by a vengeful ghost. Illness could be a punishment from an offended deity. Priests double as exorcists, reciting chants and burning incense to chase away unseen evils. One of the most powerful goddesses in this divine web is Inanna, already known to us as the queen of love and war. But she's also central to agriculture and fertility. In one myth, she descends to the underworld, taking with her the power of growth. The land withers, nothing sprouts. Only her eventual return restores the cycle. It's a vivid dramatization of seasonal change, turned into divine narrative. These myths are not just bedtime stories, they are cultural operating systems. They teach when to plant, when to harvest, when to offer thanks. Calendars are based on lunar cycles, but aligned with agricultural events. Festivals are timed to mark transitions in the farming year. Planting season, time to honour Enki, first sheaf harvested, offer it to Ninurta, and then there's the matter of gender. Sumerian society is often portrayed as male-dominated, and in many ways it is. Kings are male. Most scribes are male. Legal documents favour patrilineal inheritance. But the reality is more nuanced, and, at times, surprisingly flexible. Take Inanna again. She's not demure, she's not secondary. She commands armies, initiates lovers, and in some myths, even absorbs the powers of other gods to become supreme. Her cult is wildly popular, and her priesthood includes women and individuals of ambiguous gender roles. Gala priests, who sing laments in the temple and occupy a sacred third gender space in society. Some scholars suggest these figures were biological males who adopted feminine dress and mannerisms as part of their religious function. There's also evidence of property-owning women, especially widows and priestesses. Some female names appear as scribes or witnesses in legal documents, and in a few rare cases, women rise to political power. especially in religious centres where priesthood and governance intertwine. Marriage, meanwhile, is both sacred and practical. Ceremonies involve contracts, dowries, and often a symbolic union with the deity. But romantic poetry exists too, some of it tender, some quite steamy. One famous example, possibly recited during the sacred marriage ritual, involves a woman describing her lover in terms that would make a modern pop song blush. Let's just say metaphors involving butter and dates were employed with gusto. Children are desired, but childhood isn't always gentle. From a young age, boys destined for education are sent to the Aduba. There, under the strict eye of a master scribe, they memorise sign lists, copy proverbs, and practice complex arithmetic. Mistakes are corrected with, well, let's call it vigorous encouragement. The phrase, "the tablet house is a house of woe," appears more than once in student writings. But if a child survives this gauntlet, he emerges with one of the most powerful skills in Sumer, literacy. Scribes are the gatekeepers of administration, the authors of myths, the recorders of law. They're essential to temple and palace alike. In a world ruled by words pressed into clay, they are the ones holding the stylus. Meanwhile, outside the cities, rural life continues at its own pace. Farmers rise early to tend barley, onions, garlic, and dates. They battle weeds, mend canals, and hope the gods are in a good mood. Oxen plod through fields pulling wooden ploughs with copper tips. Donkeys, the ancient pickup trucks, haul loads to market. Life is hard, often backbreaking but deeply connected to the land. Weather is a constant concern. A bad flood can wipe out an entire season's work. A dry year means starvation. No one takes nature for granted. The gods might bless or punish, but either way, humans are at their mercy. And yet, amid all this toil, there's joy. Families gather for meals under the stars. Musicians play in courtyards. Children splash in canals. Festivals bring music, dancing, and the smell of roasted lamb. The human spirit, resilient, curious, ever hungry for connection, finds ways to flourish, even in a world defined by mud, sweat, and divine uncertainty. It's easy to romanticize this past, but Sumer isn't a utopia. It's a place of stark hierarchies, frequent warfare, and limited mobility. Slavery exists. Poverty is common. Life expectancy is short. And yet it's also a world that invents writing, builds towering temples, brews beer with religious enthusiasm, and ponders mortality with philosophical depth. It's a civilization that, despite its flaws, pushes forward, step by muddy step, into the unknown. And for now, the rivers still flow, the barley still grows, and the scribes are still writing. As the Sumerian sun climbs into its relentless midday blaze, casting short, hard shadows against the baked brick walls of Lagash and Uruk, there is one guaranteed way to keep spirits buoyant. And no, it's not prayer, it's beer, again. And this time, not just as sustenance, but as celebration. Because while beer may fuel the workers' diet, it also sweetens their rituals, lubricates diplomacy, and powers a surprising amount of poetry. There's an actual Sumerian drinking song, carved into a clay tablet nearly 4,000 years ago, that would put many modern bar anthems to shame. It praises Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, in a kind of tipsy liturgy. It describes how she kneads the bapir, a twice-baked barley bread, how she lets the fermenting mash bubble in great vats, and how the drink is poured from the golden vessel that overflows like the Tigris. That's not just a brewing manual, it's a love letter, and beer truly is loved. Even the gods expect their cut. Tablets describing offerings include massive quantities of grain turned into beer, sometimes enough to host what sounds suspiciously like divine keggers. The priests, ever resourceful, ensure that temple stockpiles keep flowing, with rigorous record-keeping. Clay tablets itemize temple beer deliveries right down to the jar. It's simultaneously reverent and gloriously mundane. 2 jars of dark beer for Enlil, 3 jars of light beer for Ninlil, 1 jar of sweet beer for the moon god Nana, because even lunar deities get thirsty. In everyday life, beer serves as a great social equalizer. The high priest might drink from a polished cup, while the field hand sips from a shared jug, but both are partaking in the same ritual. It's bonding, it's belief, it's brunch. And it's not just about beer. The entire Sumerian diet is a blend of what they grow, what they trade, and what they coax from the rivers and canals. Barley is king, Bread is its loyal companion. These come in hundreds of forms: flat, leavened, baked, boiled, stuffed. Cooks mix dates, figs, onions, and even herbs into elaborate stews. Fish are plentiful, pulled fresh from the rivers and roasted over open flames or dried and salted for later. Meat is rarer and more precious. Sheep and goats are common livestock, but they're also sacrificial animals and sources of milk, so slaughtering them isn't taken lightly. Cattle are reserved for the elite or for major festivals. Pork, surprisingly absent. Possibly a taboo, or maybe pigs just didn't play well in the irrigated marshlands. Dairy, on the other hand, is a culinary playground. The Sumerians make yogurt, cheese and butter with surprising finesse. In fact, one clay tablet lists a butter priest, suggesting that dairy production was not only sacred but potentially an honoured profession. Somewhere in ancient Ur, a man is lighting incense over a butter churn, and we respect him for it. But for all their agricultural bounty, the Sumerians are acutely aware that food doesn't just come from effort. It comes from the favour of the gods. A bad season might mean the goddess of grain is offended. A poor fishing haul, maybe the river god is sulking. So offerings are made constantly. First fruits, best cuts, perfectly poured beer. Altars smell like smoke and spices, and the clink of ceramic offering bowls becomes a background rhythm of daily life. Interestingly, the Sumerians also recognise a culinary concept that might best be described as temple catering. Many rituals involve preparing elaborate meals for the gods, which naturally the priests consume after the ceremony. Some temples even maintain full kitchens with staff and standard menus. So yes, somewhere between worship and worship, the Sumerians invent religious catering. Their food culture is mirrored in their social gatherings. Banquets are key political tools. Kings host feasts for dignitaries, generals, and sometimes rival city emissaries. These aren't just meals, they're performances. The size of your roast lamb speaks volumes. The quality of your beer, a diplomatic signal. If you serve sour beer at a state banquet, you're not just a bad host, you're making a statement. And when they're not negotiating over flatbreads, the Sumerians are fighting. City-states are constantly at odds. Sometimes it's over land, sometimes over canals, and sometimes just because someone insulted someone else's god. These conflicts are rarely full-scale wars in the modern sense. They're more like seasonally recurring turf squabbles, with spikes of real violence. Soldiers are drawn from the city's able-bodied males. There's no standing army in early Sumer, just a militia summoned by urgent messengers and priestly proclamations. Weapons are basic but brutal. Spears, maces, copper axes, and the iconic Sumerian innovation, the war cart. These aren't quite chariots yet. They're heavy four-wheeled carts pulled by donkeys or wild asses, onagers, and used to transport armed men into battle or overrun lightly defended enemies. Picture a wooden tank complete with spiked wheels, rattling across a dusty plain while terrified enemies scatter like startled pigeons. Tactics are simple: formation marches, shield walls, and overwhelming force. But logistics are already impressively advanced. Cities stockpile supplies, maintain detailed records of equipment, and even pay soldier stipends, in grain of course. Some tablets mention bonuses for bravery, or extra rations for those wounded in battle. Sumerian HR is clearly on top of things. One of the most revealing artifacts from this period is the Standard of Ur, a mosaic panel showing two sides of Sumerian life. One side depicts peace, a procession of nobles feasting with musicians accepting tribute. The other side shows war, soldiers trampling enemies, dragging prisoners, and presenting spoils. It's a visual manifesto. This is what civilization means. We build, we fight, we win, and then we feast. Still, even amid the bloodshed, there's a profound understanding that conflict is temporary. Wars are followed by treaties, usually recorded in clay and sealed with divine symbols. Cities swear oaths by their gods, exchange hostages, or erect border markers. Occasionally, peace even lasts longer than a season. But the fighting never fully disappears, and with each new battle, new heroes rise. Some are remembered in song, others in inscriptions, and a few, just a few, make their way into myth. One such figure is Eannatum of Lagash, a warrior king whose campaigns are described with something close to breathless awe. His victories over neighbouring Yuma are immortalised in the Stele of the Vultures, a carved stone monument showing rows of decapitated enemies, divine eagles clutching limbs, and Eannatum striding in victory. It's not subtle, but then again, neither is war. These kings don't just fight, they build. They commission temples, canals, city walls, and then they brag about them. Inscriptions routinely describe how a king restored the sacred canal of Enlil, or built the great ziggurat in honour of Nana. It's civic pride, divine appeasement, and legacy building all at once. And through all of it, harvest and war, banquet and burial, runs a strong current of ritual. Everything is ritualized, from bathing before prayer to choosing the right kind of incense, from how one enters a temple to how one lays the first brick in a building. Even dreams are subject to ritual interpretation. If you dream of a snake, bad omen, a flying fish, excellent news, a goat wearing a crown, better call a priest. The priesthood, already mentioned for their economic prowess, also serve as spiritual guides. They read omens in smoke, in birds, and yes, in sheep livers. Haruspicy, the art of divining the future through animal entrails, becomes a respected science. Livers are studied, mapped, and compared. Ah, a priest might murmur, see how the right lobe bulges? The god favours this campaign. It's not quite modern science, but it is systematic. Priests keep detailed records of liver patterns and outcomes. They create clay models of livers, complete with labelled parts and annotations. It's one of the earliest examples of anatomical modelling, albeit for prophetic rather than medical purposes, and it underscores a crucial point. For the Sumerians, the sacred and the practical are inseparable. Religion isn't a weekend activity, it's woven into everything. To plant is a prayer, to fight is a ritual, to drink beer is potentially a divine offering. Every action echoes in the cosmic ledger. So, as the sun dips below the horizon and the last call to prayer echoes from the temple steps, the city of Uruk glows again with oil lamps and laughter. Clay tablets are tucked away. Instruments strum gentle lullabies. And in the quiet corners of courtyards, families gather, sharing flatbread, sipping beer, telling stories. Stories about gods and kings, about brave deeds and foolish mistakes. Stories that bind them to each other, to their past, and to the great mysterious world they're slowly learning to master. The sun rises over the plains of southern Mesopotamia with a kind of dry heat that bakes the landscape into a cracked mosaic. Dust clings to every surface. Donkeys bray in the distance, their backs burdened with baskets of reeds, pottery, or occasionally freshly forged copper weapons. The city gates creak open, not for trade today, but for something far grimmer. A war cart rolls through, its wheels leaving jagged tracks in the dry earth, its riders standing tall, eyes fixed on the far horizon. In Sumer, peace is always temporary. Though they build temples and pen poetry to the stars, the Sumerians are not strangers to conflict. Their city-states, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Umma, Kish, and a dozen more, are locked in near-constant feuds. These aren't border skirmishes fought with sharp sticks and angry shouting. These are campaigns with calculated logistics, elite warriors, war chariots, and divine endorsements. The war cart is their deadliest innovation. Early chariots, if one can call them that, are not the sleek, spoked-wheel speedsters of later Egyptian fame. These are heavy, four-wheeled monstrosities made of wood and leather, pulled not by horses which haven't yet been domesticated here, but by teams of onagers or wild asses. The onager is famously stubborn and not thrilled about being harnessed, but they're fast and tough, and that's what matters. These carts carry soldiers armed with spears, axes, and copper-tipped projectiles. Their purpose is simple: break enemy lines, trample foot soldiers, and intimidate opponents into a quick surrender. Often, they're accompanied by foot troops carrying long spears and rectangular shields made from wood and leather. Defensive walls might be thick, but mobile war carts are the medieval battering ram's older, dustier cousin. The earliest known example of Sumerian military conflict is between the cities of Lagash and Umma, two neighbours with a particularly bitter rivalry over a fertile strip of land called the Guadana, literally edge of the plain. Both cities claim divine rights to the territory, both invoke their gods, and neither is willing to blink first. Lagash, under the leadership of King Eannatum, becomes the first city to claim a true military triumph in recorded history. His conquest is immortalised on a limestone monument known as the Stele of the Vultures. The stele shows a grim montage, rows of disciplined Lagash soldiers advancing in formation, a net full of Umete prisoners awaiting execution, vultures hovering with entrails in their beaks. It's not subtle. It's state-sponsored horror, meant to show just how badly things will go for anyone who challenges Lagash again. But of course, someone always does. Warfare in Sumer is seasonal. Campaigns are launched after the barley's harvested and the rivers have calmed. Soldiers march out under the banners of their city gods, drums pounding, chants rising, dust clouds billowing behind them. These armies aren't massive by modern standards, perhaps a few thousand troops per city. But in a land of compact city-states, that's enough to conquer, raise, or enforce tribute. Sieges are brutal. Walls, though high, can be undermined. Gates are burned. Supplies are cut off. Water channels are diverted or poisoned. Cities like Kish or Umma don't just suffer military defeats, they suffer economic strangulation. If your canals are captured, your fields dry out. And without barley, you might as well surrender. Still, defence is a major concern. Most Sumerian cities are surrounded by thick mud brick walls, often several metres high and reinforced with bastions and towers. These are built not just to repel invaders, but to impress. A massive wall is a statement of divine favour and civic pride. It says, "Our gods protect us, and we can build like no other." Inside those walls, cities prepare for war in their own way. Workshops shift production from pottery to weapons. Blacksmiths hammer out spear tips and axe heads. Sling stones are gathered and sorted. Archers practice in open courtyards, aiming at straw dummies or tied-up reed bundles. Even scribes are busy, recording war declarations, drafting supply ledgers, and etching oaths onto clay. And those oaths matter. Sumerian warfare is inseparable from religion. Before any campaign, the king or Lugal consults the priests. Omens are read, sacrifices are made. The gods must approve, the war must be just. If the signs are bad, no amount of armour will save you. A cloud shaped like a lion, excellent. A goat with a crooked tail, cancel everything. Victory is attributed not just to strategy, but to divine will. If Lagash triumphs over Umma, it's because Ningirsu, their city god, is stronger than Umma's Shara. And after the war, temples often receive a generous cut of the spoils: grain, livestock, gold and slaves. Religious and military success go hand in hand, and the losers, they don't fare well. If a city resists too long, its temple might be looted, its ziggurat desecrated, its statues smashed. Kings are executed or paraded in chains, entire populations might be relocated, and while Sumerian wars are rarely genocidal, they are humiliating. Subjugated cities pay tribute, provide hostages, and occasionally adopt the victor's gods into their own pantheon. But there's a practical side to all this warfare too. Conquest opens trade routes, it secures water rights, it brings prestige. A victorious king can marry into rival dynasties, assert control over resource-rich lands, or simply gain the moral high ground. And that high ground, quite literally, might become the base of a new ziggurat. Still, even victors don't rest long. Rebellions are common, alliances are fragile. One year's friend becomes next year's enemy. City-states form coalitions, often led by the most powerful among them. But these coalitions are temporary, born of convenience. As soon as the threat passes, so does the unity. There are attempts at hegemony. Kish, for example, frequently claims the title King of Kish, a symbolic label meaning ruler of all Sumer. But the reality is murkier. No city maintains dominance for long. Power rotates. Leadership is always in flux. Yet amid this churn, something unusual happens. The concept of statecraft begins to emerge. Not just war for war's sake, but war as policy. Kings issue proclamations. Laws are carved into stone. Cities enter treaties that outline land ownership, trade terms, and military obligations. One famous treaty between Lagash and Umma, yes, again, even includes a curse clause. If Umma breaks the agreement, may Enlil shatter her canals and Ninhursag dry her fields, which, to be fair, is a pretty persuasive deterrent. The evolution of military culture also leads to the professionalization of certain roles. There are palace guards, royal chariot teams, even scribes who specialize in battlefield reports, and there are heroes, individual warriors whose names live on in poems and temple inscriptions. One such name is Lugal-Sagisi, king of Yuma, who rises from a defeated city to eventually conquer all of Sumer. He declares himself ruler from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, a grand claim, and possibly an exaggerated one, but it signals something new, the dream of empire. Lugalzagesi marches through Sumer, unifying the warring city-states under a single banner. He writes of his triumphs with eloquent arrogance, claiming to have broken the pride of Uruk and washed his weapons in the sea. But his reign is brief, because from the north a new threat approaches, and he isn't Sumerian. His name is Sargon, his city is Akkad, and he's about to change everything. The sun rises one morning not over Sumer but beyond it, up north in a small city called Akkad, a place of rougher dialects, ambitious traders, and a chieftain's son with something to prove. His name is Sargon. His birth is shrouded in legend. He claims to be born of a temple priestess, set adrift in a basket on the Euphrates like a myth waiting to be written. Whether that's true or not, what matters more is this. He doesn't stay adrift for long. Sargon, whose name means true king, begins his career humbly, perhaps as a cupbearer to the king of Kish. But like any great climber of ladders, he doesn't stay second tier for long. With charm, strategy, and a rather large helping of ambition, he topples the existing order and seizes power. Then he does something no one in Sumer has done before. He builds an empire. He marches south and defeats Lugalzagesi, the prideful king of Umma who had briefly unified Sumer. Sargon drags him in chains to Nipper and, in a poetic flourish of dominance, presents him at the temple of Enlil. From there, Sargon's campaign is relentless. He doesn't just conquer cities, he holds them. He establishes garrisons, appoints loyal governors, and ensures every new city gets a taste of Akkadian authority. Sargon's empire stretches from the mountains of Anatolia to the shores of the Persian Gulf. For the first time in history, the patchwork of warring city-states becomes a single political entity. Not peacefully, of course. Rebellions are constant. Every time Sargon leaves one city to pacify another, someone stirs trouble. But he keeps a tight grip. He plants Akkadian as the administrative language, spreads standardized weights and measures, and keeps the gods in his corner, especially Ishtar, the Akkadian counterpart to Inanna. Sumer, under Sargon, doesn't vanish, but it does change. Culturally, the two civilizations merge. Akkadian, a Semitic language, begins to blend with Sumerian. Bilingual inscriptions become common. Scribes must now learn both languages to maintain administrative fluency. Cuneiform evolves, accommodating new phonetic signs to match Akkadian grammar. It's the world's first multilingual bureaucracy. This period births not just a new political order, but a new cultural synthesis. Sumerian myths are copied and translated into Akkadian. Akkadian kings adopt Sumerian religious practices. Even Sargon names his daughter a high priestess of the moon god Nanna in Ur, a shrewd move that cements his political reach into the southern religious heartlands. Her name is Enheduanna, and she's about to become one of the most extraordinary voices in all of ancient history. Enheduanna isn't just a priestess. She's a poet, a theologian, a master of liturgy. Her compositions in praise of Inanna are powerful, evocative, and unprecedented. In her hymns we find something new, personality. She writes in the first person. She expresses devotion, awe, despair. She's not just writing about the gods, she's writing herself into the story. And this matters, because Enheduanna is the first known author in history whose name we know. Not anonymous, not hidden behind the veil of myth. A real person, with real thoughts, whose words survive in dozens of clay tablets. Her most famous work, The Exaltation of Inanna, reads like a cosmic love letter and a political manifesto rolled into one. In it she praises Inanna not only for her beauty and fury, but also for her ability to restore justice and harmony. The text is layered, intricate, and deeply emotional. She writes not just for the temple, but for herself. I, Enheduanna, she declares, I lived in the temple, I bore the ritual basket, I chanted the hymns. It's staggering to imagine a woman 4,000 years ago, not only composing liturgical verse but inserting herself directly into sacred texts. Her voice, pressed into clay by scribes who revered her, carries across millennia with startling clarity. But Enheduanna's life isn't all divine poetry and ritual incense. At one point she is exiled, likely during a rebellion in Ur. In her own writings, she describes the pain of being cast out, stripped of her titles, and left to wander. She begs the gods for justice. Eventually she's restored, and her hymns reflect not just spiritual ecstasy, but political resilience. Through her, we glimpse the vulnerability of even the most powerful in a world ruled by divine whims and human ambition. Her legacy is enormous. Later, Akkadian and Babylonian hymns borrow her style and themes. Her compositions become standard liturgy for centuries. She effectively codifies the goddess Inanna's persona, shaping how she is worshipped long after the Sumerians themselves fade into dust. Meanwhile, Sargon's empire thrives, at least for a while. He passes power to his sons, who continue his campaigns and administration. But the cracks begin to show. Managing such a vast territory with Bronze Age communication tools is a nightmare. Revolts flare up. Distant provinces resent Akkadian governors. Even within Sumer, loyalties are divided. One of Sargon's grandsons, Naram-Sin, takes imperial ambition to a new level. He's a warrior, a builder, and, controversially, something more. He declares himself a god. That's right. A mortal king, fully deified, complete with his own cult, temples, and hymns. Naram-Sin wears the horned helmet traditionally reserved for gods and has himself portrayed towering over vanquished enemies in stone reliefs. In one famous image, he ascends a mountain flanked by stars while his foes crumble beneath him. It's propaganda, yes, but potent propaganda. He asserts divine right not just as a representative of the gods, but as one of them. This divine kingship sets a precedent echoed by Egyptian pharaohs, Roman emperors, and plenty of later rulers who claim heavenly sanction. But hubris, as always, invites consequences. A legend arises, likely after his reign, that Naram-Sin offends the gods. He desecrates a temple or acts without divine approval. In response, the gods unleash the Gutians, wild mountain tribes from the Zagros range. These Gutians descend like a storm, sacking cities, toppling temples, and shattering the fragile unity of the Akkadian Empire. Whether the Gutians were truly divine punishment or just opportunistic raiders is unclear. Historians still debate the extent of their destruction. Some argue the Gutian period is exaggerated, a convenient scapegoat for internal collapse. Others point to archaeological evidence of disruption, abandoned cities, and economic decline. What's certain is that after the fall of Akkad, chaos returns. The dream of empire collapses into fragmented city-states once more. For a time, it seems that the great Sumerian experiment might be over, but Sumer, stubborn and resilient, refuses to vanish. Cities like Lagash, and Nippur survive the storm. Their walls are rebuilt, their fields replanted, their scribes, ever persistent, continue copying texts, preserving language, myth, and memory. In fact, during the Gutian interregnum, we begin to see a renewed interest in Sumerian identity. It's almost as if, faced with foreign invasion, the people turn back to their roots. Sumerian literature experiences a revival. Old myths are recopied. Kings commission new hymns in the ancient style, and in one particularly bold move, rises again, this time under the leadership of a man named Ur-Nammu. But that's a tale for another night. For now, we sit with Enheduanna. Her stylus rests. Her hymns echo through the temple halls. Outside, the world shifts. Empires rise, kings fall, and cities burn. But in the quiet chambers of the Moon Temple, her voice remains. Software. Fierce. Eternal. In the quiet morning light of the flick of reed styluses against damp clay is nearly rhythmic. A soft, steady rustle, broken only by the occasional grunt of frustration or the sharp reprimand of a teacher. This is the Aduba, the Sumerian tablet house. It smells of dust, clay, and determination. Here, boys train not to fight or farm but to write, and not just casually, intensely, exhaustively, for years. The Sumerian education system is one of the earliest formal scholastic structures known to us. Its purpose is simple but profound: produce scribes. And being a scribe is no minor gig. In a world where power flows through temple ledgers, grain tallies, and royal decrees, scribes are the lifeblood of civilization. The Edaba is not optional, and it's not gentle. Most students are boys from elite or well-connected families, sons of scribes, priests, merchants, or bureaucrats. Their mornings begin with recitations, long lists of cuneiform signs, columns of vocabulary, Sumerian on one side, Akkadian on the other, lists of professions, plants, animals, metals, and tools. If there's a category, they memorize it. Repetition is constant. Drills are relentless. A typical school tablet might show a teacher's example on one side, the student's wobbly attempt on the other. Corrections are common, and so are the consequences of sloppiness. Corporal punishment isn't just permitted, it's practically ceremonial. A scribe named Nidaba-ed-Din once wrote, "The teacher hit me, and my father beat me," in what must be the oldest homework complaint in history. Yet even in the rigidity, there's creativity. Advanced students compose proverbs, debates, and dialogues. One exercise features a fictional argument between a farmer and a shepherd, each defending his role in society. Another sees the pen and the stylus squabbling over who's more essential. The stylus naturally wins, because the Sumerians always root for writing. Over time, talented scribes graduate to more specialised roles. Some become legal clerks, others temple record keepers, and a select few enter royal service. Their job isn't just writing, it's interpreting the will of the gods, codifying justice, and literally shaping how history remembers its kings. And there is history, meticulously recorded in dusty rooms filled with thousands of clay tablets. Everything is written down: grain yields, military campaigns, oaths, laws, invoices, births and deaths, even insults. One tablet from a teacher to a student reads, "You do not know anything. You do not comprehend the art of the scribal craft. Why do I have to keep teaching you the same thing over and over?" It's unclear whether this was meant as feedback or just a scribe's bad day, but it's preserved for eternity. Even the tools are deliberate. The stylus is carved from a reed, cut at a precise angle to create wedge-shaped impressions. The writing surface is clay, damp and pliable. Mistakes can be smoothed out with a bit of water and a careful fingertip, but once dried or baked, the tablet is eternal, and they are everywhere. In temples, archives, private homes. Some are formal documents, others are casual notes. One reads, "Send more beer." Another is a teacher's roll call. Some tablets are encased in clay envelopes, sealed with cylinder seals bearing intricate images, official signatures that mark authenticity. These seals are personal and often beautiful. Lions, winged gods, kneeling worshippers. Scribes also write letters, though not the romantic kind. Most are practical. Requests for grain, complaints about shipments, updates on local affairs. Yet even here, personality shines through. One man writes to his superior, "You promised me a donkey." There is no donkey. Why is there no donkey? Bureaucracy, it seems, is as old as writing itself. Yet, for all their seriousness, the Sumerians also have a sense of humour, and it seeps into their literature. Take, for instance, the instructions of Shurupak, a father's advice to his son. It reads like a mix of proverbs, threats, and moral guidance. Do not answer back against your father. Do not go alone into the fields. Do not raise your hand against the weak. But then there are gems like, "A scribe who does not know Sumerian. What kind of scribe is he?" Ouch. Or the so-called first joke, scratched onto a tablet that reads, "Something which has never occurred since time immemorial. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap." It's crude, yes, but also evidence that fart humour is indeed timeless. Another literary oddity is the debate between summer and winter, where the two seasons argue over who is more valuable. It's delightfully philosophical. Summer boasts of grain and growth. Winter counters with rest and recovery. The gods ultimately decide the winner, but the real joy is in their playful jabs and poetic barbs. These dialogues, debates, and instructions form a vibrant intellectual tradition. They're not just for entertainment, they're teaching tools, reflections on society, and exercises in logic. The Sumerians may not have invented the Socratic method, but they weren't far off. And then there's law. Long before Hammurabi's code, the Sumerians developed their own legal traditions. One of the earliest known legal texts comes from the city of Urukagina of Lagash, a reform-minded ruler who tries to curb corruption and protect the poor. His laws ban extortion by officials, standardize temple taxes, and prohibit the seizure of property without due process. A later king, Ur-Nammu of Ur, leaves behind a more formal code inscribed on tablets. His laws are surprisingly progressive for their time. Fines are preferred over mutilation. Offences are clearly defined: theft, adultery, false accusations, harm to property. Penalties are scaled according to social class, but the underlying principle is clear. Justice should be regularised, not arbitrary. And always, scribes are the ones recording it. They're the court reporters, the archivists, the ones who ensure the king's word becomes policy. If a tree falls in ancient Sumer and a scribe doesn't write it down, did it even happen? Scribes also track land ownership, a crucial issue in a society where every canal, field and irrigation line must be accounted for. Disputes over boundaries are common, and detailed maps, drawn in cuneiform symbols, are used to resolve them. In one case, a farmer accuses his neighbour of moving a boundary stone. A court convenes, witnesses are called, and the scribe records the verdict. The outcome? A new stone is set and the old one is ritually cursed. You don't mess with Sumerian property lines. Religion and record-keeping, as always, are intertwined. Priests keep ledgers of offerings, dream interpretations and rituals. Every ceremony is documented. Which incense was burned, which chants were recited, how many goats were involved. If a ritual fails, the records help determine what went wrong. Maybe the goat was blemished. Maybe the stars were misaligned. Maybe someone forgot to include beer in the offering. But scribes don't only serve the temples, they're indispensable to trade. Merchants carry tablets with them, listing contracts, quantities, and delivery dates. Trade routes stretch across the ancient world, from Sumer to the Levant to Anatolia, and even distant lands like Dilmun and Meluha. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, copper from Oman, cedar wood from Lebanon, all catalogued, weighed, and sealed with a cylinder roll. At each stop, a scribe tallies the goods, compares signatures, and confirms authenticity. If someone tries to cheat, the clay tells the truth. In a world without paper, ink, or digital receipts, baked clay is as binding as law, and the aduba is the engine behind it all. Its students, once disciplined and shaped, emerge not just as writers but as architects of civilization. Without them, the gods go hungry, the canals overflow, the king's words fade. But with them, everything is remembered. As the day wears on, the heat rises. The boys of the tablet house hunch deeper into their work, the stylus scraping against clay like 1,000 tiny footprints across the landscape of time. And far off, in the ziggurat's shadow, a master scribe begins to compose a new hymn to Inanna, his stylus moving with a grace honed by decades, his fingers steady, his mind already halfway to the stars. In the bustling courtyard of Ur's ziggurat, the smell of incense mingles with the earthy tang of clay. People move with purpose, some carrying tablets, others grain, still others leading goats bleating nervously toward the temple's shadow. But not all the action today is religious. Underneath this towering testament to the gods, something else unfolds. A trial. Because long before Hammurabi carved his code into basalt, the Sumerians are already laying down laws, and just as importantly, enforcing them. We often associate ancient law with Babylon's stern declarations, an eye for an eye, etched in bold, severe script. But centuries earlier, in cities like Lagash and Ur, rulers are experimenting with systems of justice that reflect the complicated realities of urban life. And the first name to truly echo in this legal evolution is Urukagina. Urukagina rules Lagash around 2350 BCE, and is often considered the first known social reformer. The city, like most others, has grown prosperous and corrupt. Wealth concentrates in the hands of temple officials. Powerful families bend justice to their will. Prices rise, commoners grumble, and inequality festers. So Urukagina steps in. He proclaims a series of reforms. His goal isn't revolution, but fairness, or at least the appearance of it. He bans the seizure of property by force. He cancels certain debts. He limits temple taxes and restricts the influence of priestly elites. He even ensures that the poor can bury their dead without excessive fees. No, it's not exactly the Magna Carta, but it's the first recorded attempt to rebalance power and codify rights. The reforms themselves survive only in fragments, carved in fading Sumerian cuneiform, but they hint at a worldview where law is more than just the king's whim, where justice must be seen as consistent, even compassionate. And though later kings largely ignore his example, Urukagina's name is remembered as a benchmark, the guy who, for a moment, said, "Enough." By the time we reach the third dynasty of Ur, around 2100 BCE, legal systems have become increasingly complex. King Ur-Nammu, one of the dynasty's founders, issues a formal code of law, predating Hammurabi's by nearly 300 years. His code is practical and detailed. Murder, fined; theft, fined; false accusations, fined. The emphasis here isn't on harsh physical punishment, but on restitution and social order. A typical case might go something like this. A farmer accuses his neighbour of diverting water from a shared canal. Both men appear before the city's assembly, accompanied by scribes and, if they can afford it, a priestly advocate. Witnesses are called. Testimonies are given. The judges, often elders or temple officials, deliberate. Then comes the ruling. Perhaps a fine in silver, or a day's labour to repair the canal. The scribe records it, the men bow, and justice is done. Or at least recorded. But not all cases are so straightforward. Sometimes the law dances with religion. If someone is accused of witchcraft, evidence alone won't suffice. A priest might perform a ritual ordeal, having the accused plunge their hands into boiling water or walk across hot coals. If they emerge unharmed, the gods have spoken. Innocence. If they blister and scream, well, guilt by divine dermatology. Women too are subject to the law, but with caveats. In marriage contracts, they are often treated as property, yet they also retain specific rights. A wife may own land, initiate divorce, or reclaim her dowry under certain conditions. Widows often wield surprising economic power, especially if they're priestesses. And in temple courts, women serve not just as plaintiffs and defendants, but occasionally as judges. Property law is everywhere. In a city where every inch of canal-fed farmland is precious, disputes over land boundaries, crop yields, and ownership are common. Tablets detail transactions with obsessive specificity. 3 cubits by 7 cubits of barley field, located west of the elder date palm purchased from Lugal Nimga for 1 mina of silver, witnessed by the scribe Urshak Khan. Contracts are sacred. To break one isn't just a civic offence, it's a spiritual danger. Many begin with oaths sworn by Enlil and by the king, invoking both heavenly and earthly power. A broken oath might provoke divine wrath, bad harvests, or a liver reading so ominous that no goat in the district sleeps well that night. Laws also extend to labour. Slavery exists, but it's nuanced. Many slaves are debtors, working to repay what they owe. Others are prisoners of war, some earn wages and can eventually buy their freedom. The line between servant and slave is often blurred, especially in temple economies where labour is state-controlled but still compensated. Apprenticeships are another legal grey zone. A potter might take in a young boy to train in his craft. The boy works for years, bound by a contract. In return, he gains skills, and, if he's lucky, a future. But if he misbehaves or runs away, the contract holds. He can be summoned, fined, even punished. And then there's the issue of inheritance. Sumerian families, like families everywhere, are complicated. Parents divide their estate among sons, often unequally. Daughters might receive dowries, or if unmarried, small parcels of land. Sometimes favouritism skews fairness. In such cases, wills are contested. Scribes are called. Old tablets are exhumed from temple vaults. Family drama, it seems, predates soap operas by several millennia. The scribes, as always, are central. They don't just record verdicts. They shape how law functions. Their wording matters. Their seals authenticate. Their memory of precedent guides decisions. In many ways, they are the judiciary's backbone, and perhaps its most powerful quiet force. But not all legal business is settled in courts. Some laws are enforced through social pressure. Gossip, for instance, is a potent tool. If a merchant cheats his customers, word spreads. If a priest abuses his tithes, the community murmurs. A bad reputation might be worse than a fine, especially in a city where everyone knows your barley count. Public shaming is also common. A thief might be paraded through the streets. A false witness might be made to pay double the value of what was lost. In extreme cases, punishment turns physical: flogging, nose-cutting, or branding. These are rare but theatrical, meant to warn the rest. Still, for all its severity, the Sumerian legal system is deeply pragmatic. It's not designed for cruelty, it's designed for stability. A society this complex, with overlapping classes, religions, and economies, needs rules. The law is a glue, sticky and sometimes unfair, but vital. One of the most touching insights into Sumerian justice comes not from a court tablet, but from a letter. In it, a man pleads for mercy for his son, wrongly imprisoned. He lists the boy's virtues, the injustice of the accusation, and appeals to both legal reason and human compassion. "Do not let him suffer," he writes. "He is innocent. The gods know this, and so do you." That letter was never answered, but it was preserved, and its very survival tells us something. Even in a society governed by codes and tablets, there's always room for a human voice, crying out for fairness in the spaces between the rules. As the day in winds down, shadows stretch across the city's clay walls. Court scribes roll up their seals, litigants head home, and in some dim chamber beneath the temple, a young apprentice copies today's rulings into the archive, the stylus clicking softly as he records another day of human frailty, hope, and justice. Dawn drapes the ziggurats in soft gold, but the roads of Ur are already stirring, not with priests or scribes this time, but with merchants. Long lines of donkeys shuffle out through the city gates, their backs laden with sacks and baskets. Copper glints in the morning light. Rolls of wool sway from side to side. Somewhere under the pile, someone curses a particularly stubborn animal and mutters about lapis lazuli, because this morning, as on many others, trade caravans are heading out into the world, beyond Sumer, beyond the rivers, toward places most Sumerians will only know through stories, maps, and ledger entries. And those ledger entries, oh, they are glorious. The Sumerians love trade. They don't just enjoy it, they systematize it, regulate it, and almost turn it into religion. They even have a patron god of commerce, Ninsun for livestock, Ningirsu for metals, and most notably the messenger god Nabu, who carries not only divine messages but, we might suspect, some serious invoices. Sumer, for all its ingenuity, is short on vital resources. There are no forests in southern Mesopotamia, no stone quarries, no large supplies of precious metals. What they have is abundance of grain, wool, textiles, ceramics, and most importantly, organisation. They produce in bulk, they record in detail, and they know exactly where every crate of barley went and what they got for it. Caravans and riverboats are the lifelines of this economy. Donkey caravans head northwest toward the Taurus Mountains to fetch timber and stone. Southward, they trade with Dilmun, modern-day Bahrain, bringing back dates, pearls, and copper. East, across the Zagros Mountains, they reach Elam and beyond, occasionally whispering about a place even farther, Meluha. Meluha, the Mystery Kingdom. Mentioned in Sumerian texts as a distant land of blackwood, ivory and exotic beasts, Meluha likely corresponds to the Indus Valley civilization. This isn't mere speculation. Archaeologists have found Sumerian seals in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, and Indus beads in Mesopotamian tombs. Ships from Meluha dock at ports near and Lagash, crewed by men with dark hair, foreign tongues, and goods beyond imagining. A tablet from Lagash records, received 2 crates of Meluhan carnelian, 3 jars of oil, 1 carved ivory comb. Who these traders are, how they navigate such vast distances without Google Maps or even a decent sextant is still debated. But the clay makes it clear. They're coming, and they're buying. In return, the Sumerians send textiles, oil, grain and wool. Their woolen garments are prized abroad, not just for their quality but for the dyes. Indigo, madder root and imported pigments allow them to colour cloth in rich purples, reds and blues. Elite Sumerian garments aren't just decorative. They're status symbols. Trade is more than goods. It brings stories, ideas, and even people. Foreign labourers settle in Sumerian cities. Diplomats exchange gifts. Languages mingle. A merchant's son might speak Sumerian at home, Akkadian in the marketplace, and pick up a few words of Elamite or Amorite from his tutor. This linguistic blend becomes a hallmark of Mesopotamian cosmopolitanism. River transport is equally vital. The Euphrates and Tigris are superhighways, albeit muddy, unpredictable ones. Flat-bottomed boats ferry goods between cities. Larger vessels with sails and oars travel downstream to the Persian Gulf. These journeys aren't leisurely cruises. Navigation requires skill. Currents shift. Sandbanks lurk. And pirates, yes, ancient pirates, occasionally appear from river reeds with clubs and spears, hoping to intercept a shipment of oil or barley. To protect trade, cities impose taxes and maintain militias. Watchtowers dot canal paths. Toll stations collect a portion of each shipment, but bureaucracy doesn't stop at the docks. Each transaction is recorded, who sent what, where it came from, what it's worth, when it's due to arrive. Clay tablets fill storerooms, each one stamped with a cylinder seal. a swirl of symbols that acts like a signature. One of the most fascinating relics of this system is the merchant's tablet. These were portable clay slates inscribed with contracts or inventories, often carried by the merchant himself. If he were robbed or questioned, the tablet proved ownership. Some even contain instructions to the recipient, like ancient packing slips. Deliver the silver to the Temple of Ishtar in Mari. Confirm receipt with seal. These aren't just receipts. They're testaments to the sheer sophistication of Sumer's commercial world. And then there's diplomacy. Trade isn't always peaceful. Cities must negotiate access to foreign ports, safe passage through rival territory, or exclusive rights to certain goods. This means emissaries, treaties, and gifts. Lots of gifts. A king might send a lapis lazuli inlaid bowl to a rival to secure peace, or a temple might send textiles to a distant shrine in return for divine goodwill and future commerce. Some Sumerian cities even keep embassies, permanent delegations in foreign lands. These officials monitor local politics, manage trade relationships, and report back to the home city. One wonders if, over late-night cups of beer, they also occasionally complain. The shipping's delayed again, the copper's overcooked, and don't get me started on the donkeys. The cities themselves reflect this mercantile mindset. Marketplaces are central, often near temples. Stalls overflow with fish, onions, beer, jewellery, spices. Hawkers shout deals. Children chase goats. Negotiations happen with the intensity of auctions, haggling over every shekel. Some cities specialise. Eridu's known for pottery. Lagash exports textiles. Ur becomes a financial centre, where loans, interest and even early versions of insurance develop. Yes, insurance. Some tablets suggest merchants could hedge against losses by pooling resources and agreeing to collective compensation. It's crude, but it's the ancestor of modern risk-sharing. And then there's the matter of money. Sumerians don't use coins. Currency is measured in weights, shekels, minas, talents. Silver is the standard, though barley often substitutes in smaller transactions. A loaf of bread might cost a few handfuls of grain. A plot of land, several minas of silver. Prices fluctuate. Markets respond to scarcity, surplus and gossip. But make no mistake, this is a market economy. Regulated, taxed and deeply entwined with the temple, yes, but driven by demand, supply and shrewd negotiation. Scribes again play a central role. Every shipment, sale or contract is documented. A merchant without a scribe is flying blind. And woe to the trader who forgets to record his inventory, because the temple accountant will not be amused. Some scribes travel with caravans. They act as notaries, mediators, even translators. Others stay behind, compiling reports and updating ledgers. Temple officials audit these records periodically, just to make sure no one is cooking the clay. And amid this network of trade and trust, stories emerge of a shipment lost in a flood, of a merchant who smuggled Elamite tin through Kish by hiding it under a load of sheep dung, of a trader who fell in love in Dilmun and stayed behind, sending letters home for years, promising he'd return after the next shipment. He never does. These fragments, preserved on small clay tablets tucked into forgotten corners of temple archives, reveal a world buzzing with movement, risk and ambition. Even as war looms, rivers shift and cities rise and fall, trade keeps flowing. It's the pulse beneath the surface, the slow, steady beat of barter and trust, contract and promise. It binds Sumer not just to itself, but to the world beyond. And so, as the last of the donkeys trudge out of Ur's gates, and the riverboats drift into the haze of the horizon, the scribes tally the numbers, press their seals, and quietly ensure that, long after the merchants are gone, the record remains. Somewhere between dawn and dusk, amid the chirping of marsh birds and the slow curl of incense rising from a courtyard burner, a Sumerian priest lowers his gaze into the still warm liver of a freshly sacrificed sheep. Around him, scribes wait in reverent silence, tablets at the ready. The liver, glistening and pale, is not just an organ, it's a map, a divine document, a cosmic inbox waiting to be read. Because here in Sumer, the gods do not communicate with lightning bolts or burning bushes. They speak through signs, subtle, strange, and often embedded in the folds of meat or the twinkle of a star. And interpreting those signs, that is the work of the diviner. Welcome to the world of Sumerian divination, a universe where nothing happens without meaning, and where every action, Every ripple in the water or dream at night might be a whispered hint from the gods. The most prestigious form of divination is extispacy, the reading of animal entrails, especially sheep livers. This practice is more science than superstition, at least by Sumerian standards. Over centuries, priests develop a detailed anatomical understanding, crafting clay models of livers covered in inscriptions that mark zones, the path of Enlil, the decision point, the evil omen lobe. It's like an ancient GPS, but for fate. Before a major decision, whether launching a war, building a canal, or choosing a successor, a ritual is held. A perfectly healthy sheep is selected, ritually cleansed and sacrificed. Its liver is removed, inspected, and compared to previous records. If a blemish appears in the zone associated with battle, the answer is no. If the gallbladder leans toward the side marked prosperity, the campaign may proceed. And lest you think this is a one-off, think again. Hundreds of clay liver models have been uncovered, each with tiny wedge-shaped annotations detailing outcomes. These aren't just mystical readings, they're data, the ancient world's closest approximation of analytics. Still, not every omen comes wrapped in meat. Stars, too, hold immense importance. The night skies above Sumer are clear, vast, and filled with meaning. Sumerian astronomer priests chart the movements of Venus, Jupiter, and Mars. They divide the sky into constellations, many of which will be borrowed and renamed by later Babylonian and Greek astrologers. But it starts here, with a priest squinting upward, stylus in hand, drawing star paths onto a clay tablet. Venus, in particular, becomes a divine signal. Known as the planet of Inanna, or Ishtar in Akkadian, its bright appearances and disappearances are recorded meticulously. A rising Venus might signal fertility, victory, or royal favour. A sudden vanishing, bad news for everyone. One remarkable tablet, the Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, from a later Babylonian era, but based on earlier Sumerian observations, records over 20 years of Venus's comings and goings. This is not casual stargazing. It's the systematic study of celestial patterns as messages from the divine. Then there are dreams. Dreams in Sumer are considered direct transmissions from the gods, personal messages delivered in the twilight between sleep and wakefulness. Dream interpreters, often temple-affiliated, consult dream dictionaries, clay tablets listing symbols and their meanings. Dream of a lion? Power is coming? Dream of falling into a pit? Beware betrayal. Dream of eating raw onions? Possibly indigestion, but also likely a financial windfall. Kings take dreams very seriously. Entire military campaigns have been launched, or aborted, based on a ruler's dream the night before. Sometimes kings dream of gods giving them weapons or garlands, other times they dream of floods or eclipses, prompting immediate temple rituals to avert disaster. If a dream is particularly disturbing, a ritual called Nisbat Tamti, to remove the evil of a dream, is performed. This might involve washing the dreamer with holy water, sacrificing an animal, and reciting chants to redirect the omen's power. Better safe than divinely smited. But the real genius of Sumerian divination lies in its flexibility. There's no singular oracle, no divine hotline. Instead, every aspect of life is a potential clue. The flight pattern of birds, the direction of smoke from a fire, even the way oil spreads on water during a purification ritual, each offers a window into the god's moods. One method, mechanomancy, involves pouring oil into a bowl of water and watching how the droplets move. If they cluster together and drift clockwise, success is near. If they scatter or form a ring, caution is advised. Another method, libanomancy, interprets the shape of incense smoke as it rises. Wispy curls suggest peace, thick plumes, conflict. And of course, the gods can be consulted more directly, through statue rituals. Every major deity has a cult statue housed in their temple. These aren't mere symbols, they are believed to be the literal embodiment of the god. Offerings are made to the statue, it is bathed, perfumed, and even dressed daily. Before major decisions, priests might present questions directly to the statue, through rituals involving music, incense, and at times, sleep. This practice, called incubation, has the priest sleep near the statue in hopes of receiving a divine dream. The god doesn't speak aloud, at least not usually, but signs may appear, a voice in the dream, a vision, a sudden bolt of inspiration. Some priests emerge claiming clear answers, Others presumably wake up confused and slightly stiff. And if a king wants a second opinion, he can commission a ritual called tamatu, a formal oracle consultation. A question is written on a tablet in yes or no format. A sheep is sacrificed. The liver is examined. If the designated zone is clean, the answer is yes. If not, try again, with another sheep, and another. Some records show up to 7 sheep sacrificed for a single question. The gods may be omnipotent, but they're apparently not great at getting to the point. Still, this relentless consultation reflects a deep cultural belief that the world is not random, that every illness, every flood, every triumph has a reason, that with enough insight, enough ritual, enough careful watching, one can decode the universe. This belief isn't naive, it's logical in a world where unpredictability can mean starvation or survival. When a river floods too early, the barley drowns. When it floods too late, the fields crack. A misaligned canal ruins an entire city's food supply. In such a delicate balance, seeking divine guidance becomes not just pious, it becomes prudent. Even skeptics must admit, the Sumerians are committed to their system, and remarkably it works, at least for them. It provides structure, comfort, and a shared language for interpreting the chaos of life. The system is not without contradictions. Different omens sometimes conflict. Priests disagree. One god says yes, another no. In these cases, the higher-ranking deity wins, or the ritual is repeated, or the king just does what he wanted in the first place and blames the sheep later. Historians still argue whether Sumerian divination was truly believed or merely political theatre. The answer is probably both. For the commoner, the omens offered a window into fate. For the elite, they offered plausible justification for decisions already made. And amid it all, the scribes keep writing. They catalogue every omen, every ritual, every outcome. Clay tablets multiply. Schools of divination form, passing down techniques like ancient scientific guilds. A young priest might train for decades before being entrusted with a major reading. In the Barrow tradition, he becomes not just a priest, but a scientist, philosopher, and bureaucrat all in one. And so, under the ever-watching sky, the Sumerians live not in fear of the unknown, but in respectful dialogue with it. They know the gods don't always answer clearly, but they believe the answers are there, for those who listen hard enough. As the day cools and stars begin to prickle the darkening sky, a priest climbs the ziggurat summit, scroll in hand, and lifts his eyes toward Venus. Below, the city quiets. The livers are buried, the incense burnt, but above, the heavens still whisper, and Sumer still listens. The soft patter of feet across Ur's stone courtyards carries with it the echo of daily life. Vendors shout for attention beneath woven canopies. Children splash in narrow irrigation channels, laughing and scattering chickens. And in a quiet corner, beside a shaded doorway, a woman sits hunched over a damp clay tablet, stylus in hand. She's not recording a law or a tax. She's writing a love letter. Not every tablet in Sumer is about gods, kings, or grain. Many are about simple, human things, affection, heartbreak, complaints, and even grocery lists. As the centuries tick on and scribes become more confident and creative, we begin to glimpse the full depth of Sumerian society. Not just its official records, but its soft underbelly of lived experience. And the result? It's astonishingly familiar. Let's start with love. The Sumerians don't shy away from it. In fact, they embrace it with gusto. Temple hymns to Inanna often double as love poetry, filled with intense imagery, sensual language, and metaphor. One preserved poem, written from the perspective of a woman, begins, "My beloved, the delight of my eyes, met me." What follows is an evocative and surprisingly physical description of her lover's approach, his touch, their union. These poems are often ceremonial, possibly used in the sacred marriage rite, a ritual reenactment between the high priestess and king meant to symbolize Inanna's union with the shepherd god Dumuzi. It's theological, but also poetic, romantic, maybe even a little steamy. And the Sumerians write it all down. But love isn't always divine. Many tablets preserve ordinary letters, pleas from husbands, longing notes from wives, messages between siblings. One simply says, "Tell my brother to return quickly. My heart is not easy until he is home." Another, "I wait for you at the edge of the canal as you promised." They're brief, unadorned, and painfully human. Even marriage contracts reflect this balance between duty and desire. Typically they're transactional: land, dowry, conditions of divorce. But every so often you find a line that suggests affection. She is beloved of his heart, or he will not take another as long as she lives. Whether these were legal flourishes or genuine sentiments, who's to say? But they add warmth to what might otherwise be cold documents. And when love sours, there's divorce. It's not uncommon. Women can initiate it, though the legal process is more burdensome for them. Grounds include infertility, abuse, or abandonment. A man might return a dowry, a woman might forfeit it. Children, if any, are often assigned based on status and age. The temple mediates when disputes escalate, and scribes dutifully note each judgment in clay. Beyond matters of the heart, everyday tablets record the minutiae of domestic life. Grocery inventories list onions, barley, dates, beer, and oil. Household to-do lists are scratched hastily onto fragments. One amusing entry reads, 1 jug oil, 1 measure barley. Send boy to fetch it. No delay. There are tablets with recipes, grains boiled in beer, meats seasoned with leeks and garlic, stews thickened with crushed barley. Laundry, too, leaves its mark. Temples have designated washing staff, and records include bundles of garments received, washed, and returned. There's no word for missing sock, but surely someone's lamented it at some point. After all, some tablets catalogue personal items with eerie specificity. 1 wool cloak with blue edge, 2 pairs sandals, left straps weak, 1 comb, ivory. Owner, Aradnana childcare appears more indirectly. There are contracts for wet nurses, often women paid to care for infants of wealthy families. These agreements include payment, often in grain, duration of service, and clauses for illness or loss. One such document chillingly includes a clause: if the child dies and the nurse is proven blameless, she shall still receive payment. A quiet reminder of the fragility of early life. Even play is documented. Clay rattles and animal figurines have been uncovered from residential areas. Game boards, grids of squares with carved tokens, suggest dice games or races, perhaps early versions of backgammon. Children's graffiti scratched onto courtyard walls show stick figures, animals, even crude jokes. Speaking of jokes, the Sumerians love wordplay. Riddles and puns appear in school exercises carved between more serious lessons. One riddle asks, what is house-like yet walks on 4 legs? Answer, a chair. Another, he who eats with his face on the floor, what is it? Answer, a dog. Not quite knock-knock jokes, but evidence that humour too is eternal. Even insults make it onto tablets. One school tablet includes this gem: you are the kind of person who cannot even count to 10 without a scribe to help him. Oof. Burned by bureaucracy. But not all texts are light-hearted. Some carry deep grief. Letters of mourning describe lost parents, fallen sons, miscarried infants. One poem, perhaps recited at a funeral, reads, she descended into the land where dust is food. Her voice is silenced. Her arms, which once held me, are now clay. It is raw, honest, achingly simple. Wills and inheritance records are equally poignant. Fathers bequeath their tools to sons, houses to daughters, livestock to siblings. Sometimes the distributions hint at tensions. One child receives a double portion, another merely a jar of oil. The scribes record it all with unflinching precision. No favouritism, just the law. And amid all this, love, loss, lists, there are still the routines of city life. Water is drawn from shared wells, ovens are communal, bread is baked in massive clay tandoors, public bathhouses serve as places of cleansing and gossip. Streets bustle with vendors and passers-by. Cats prowl for scraps. Dogs nap under awnings. The smell of fish mingles with smoke and spices. Everyday religion hums beneath it all. Small household shrines honour protective deities. Offerings of fruit, incense or bread are placed beside figurines. People mumble short prayers before meals, before journeys, before childbirth. Religion isn't an event, it's a rhythm, a murmur in the background of daily life. And through this murmur, the gods remain close. They aren't remote Olympians, they're present in every grain stored, every illness endured, every clay lamp lit. When the barley grows strong, Enlil is pleased. When trade is good, Nabu smiles. When a child laughs, Surely Inanna herself leans in to listen. Even animals get swept into this divine order. Cattle are dedicated to gods. Cats, while not yet divine, are certainly respected. Sheep, of course, are both sustenance and sacrifice, and somewhere, inevitably, a family names a donkey Big Nose or Loud One, and the scribes grumble as they dutifully carve it into the livestock ledger. By now, it's clear, Sumer is not just ziggurats and kings, it's people. Awkward, passionate, meticulous, forgetful, hopeful people. They fall in love, they argue, they panic over deadlines, they dream, mourn, joke and cook dinner. Their stories, scrawled into clay by steady or nervous hands, tell us not just what they did, but who they were. And as night falls and oil lamps flicker behind clay lattice windows, one can almost hear them. The soft scrape of styluses, the splash of bath water, the laughter of children, the whispers of lovers, the tired mutter of a merchant counting jars, the rustle of sandals across worn brick. Life, preserved not in monuments, but in moments, in clay. The wind shifts across the Sumerian plain, bringing with it a different cadence. Boots instead of sandals, orders instead of prayers. The language that echoes through Lagash and Nippur still sounds familiar, but its rhythm is sharper now, accented by the north. Sumer has been absorbed into a larger body, a new force with fresh ambitions. The city of Akkad has become a throne, and the king seated there is no longer Sumerian by name, he is Akkadian. And yet Sumer's heart continues to beat beneath the surface. By the time the dust of Gutian chaos settles, Sumer has been knocked from its pedestal but not from existence. Though foreign rulers have trod its streets and plundered its temples, the cities refuse to vanish. In fact, the chaos seems to have had the opposite effect. Sumer reasserts itself, not through rebellion, but through resilience, and leading this revival is the city of Ur. Under the rule of Ur-Nammu, Sumer experiences one last golden bloom. This is no minor restoration, it's a deliberate reimagining of what Sumer can be. Ur-Nammu doesn't just claim kingship, he reshapes it. He calls himself King of Sumer and Akkad, a title that acknowledges both cultures, both legacies. It's political unity by linguistic fusion. But it's not just about titles, it's about action. Ur-Nammu initiates vast building projects, reinforcing city walls, repairing temples, and, most famously, constructing the great ziggurat of Ur. This towering monument, its layers ascending like a stairway to the gods, becomes the centerpiece of a city reborn. Made of mud brick and reinforced with baked brick facing, it reflects not only religious devotion but architectural ambition. At its summit, a shrine dedicated to Nanna, the moon god, gleams with silver and blue tiles. Priests ascend its broad staircases to offer incense and observe lunar movements. It's part temple, part observatory and wholly political. It says to the world, Sumer is not dead, it is exalted. Ur-Nammu's rule is organised, literate and deeply aware of historical precedent. He revives the Sumerian language in official inscriptions, a cultural flex that would be like modern Rome issuing laws in Latin. He codifies laws that, unlike earlier fragmentary reforms, survive nearly intact. These laws emphasise fairness, compensation for injury, protection for orphans and widows, strict penalties for false accusations. It's less bloody than later codes and more focused on social balance. Yet the king does not rule alone. His dynasty, known as the Third Dynasty of Ur, becomes a family affair. Sons are appointed to govern outlying cities. Daughters become high priestesses, especially of Nanna's cult. This isn't just nepotism, it's strategic. Priestesses wield enormous influence. Their presence in key temples helps bind the cities together under one spiritual and administrative framework. One such priestess is Enegalana, daughter of Shulgi, Ur-Nammu's son and successor. She maintains rituals in Ur's temple, corresponding with palace officials, managing temple staff and overseeing complex festivals. Her role is part diplomat, part theologian and part CFO. Through her the dynasty speaks with the voice of the divine. And what of Shulgi? He's no mere caretaker of his father's legacy. Shulgi reigns for nearly 5 decades and transforms the empire into a bureaucratic marvel. He standardizes weights and measures, builds a network of roads, and boasts, perhaps a bit too often, of his strength, wisdom, and poetic skills. In one inscription, he he claims to run from Nippur to Ur in a single day. A boastful marathon that may be less historical truth and more ancient PR stunt. Still, the point stands. Shulgi wants to be remembered as both king and cultural icon. He even composes hymns to himself, in which he praises his own piety, wisdom, and talent with languages. Modest, he is not. Under Shulgi, Sumer becomes more centralised than ever. Local governors report directly to the royal court. Taxes are streamlined. Record-keeping explodes. Archives in cities like Pusrish, Dargan and Umma teem with clay tablets documenting every barley bushel, every goat, every jar of oil received, stored or redistributed. It's astonishing. One archive contains over 30,000 tablets. These aren't literature or law, they're receipts. Day-to-day data. Received from Lulubanda 2 fattened rams, transferred to the temple granary, sealed by Lushulgi. Its bureaucracy as monument, a kingdom built on clay rather than stone. And yet, amid all this regulation, art flourishes. Sumerian literature enters its classical phase. Old myths are recopied, standardized, and elaborated. The tale of Gilgamesh is refined. Hymns to the gods become increasingly poetic. Instructions, laments, proverbs, and debates, all written in the refined, formal Sumerian that scribes are now trained to compose like elite authors. Music, too, thrives. Harps, lyres, and flutes become standard in temple orchestras. Instruments are decorated with gold and lapis lazuli. Performances accompany rituals, coronations, and funerals. Musicians hold respected titles, and female performers, often temple singers, are both artist and priestess. Sumerian schools evolve into true academies. Scribes study both Sumerian and Akkadian, mastering grammar, law, literature, and astronomy. They produce lexicons and grammars, early dictionaries used to preserve a language no longer spoken by the average farmer, but venerated by the elite. It's a deliberate act of cultural preservation, like learning Latin in medieval Europe. Dead? Perhaps, but sacred. And speaking of sacred, Sumerian religion doesn't fade, it proliferates. Temples expand, ritual calendars become more elaborate. State-sponsored festivals ensure gods are not only honoured but entertained. The king sponsors races, feasts, sacrifices and theatrical reenactments of myth. One festival dramatises Inanna's descent to the underworld, complete with costumes, songs and ritual lamentations. It's theology as performance art. But behind the sacred pageantry, the empire is strained. To maintain control over such a vast territory, the kings of Ur III rely heavily on taxes, labour drafts and military conscription. Dissent festers in the outer provinces. The Elamites, ever the opportunists, raid from the east. Amorite tribes from the west press into Sumerian lands, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. The economic system, heavily reliant on centralised redistribution, begins to crack. By the time of Ibisin, the last king of the dynasty, Ur is teetering. A drought hits, the rivers shift, trade falters, grain prices skyrocket, provinces rebel, the Elamites invade again, this time more decisively. In a dramatic collapse, Ur is sacked, the ziggurat is looted, the statue of Nana is carried off, the city's heart is broken. And yet, even in defeat, the scribes continue to write. They compose laments, mournful, haunting poems that grieve for the lost city. Ur is a house that has crumbled. The wind whines in its streets. The people are dust. These laments, known as the Laments for Ur and the Lament for Sumer and Ur, are not just expressions of loss. They are literature, ritual, resistance. They blame not the king nor politics, but the gods themselves. Enlil has turned his gaze away. The days are dark. The people plead for mercy, for restoration, for remembrance. And in those lines, we hear the final voice of Sumer, not in conquest, but in poetry. It is tempting to call this the end, to mark the fall of Ur as the last breath of Sumer, but that would be too clean, too neat. Because Sumer does not disappear. Its language, though no longer spoken, continues as the script of scholarship. Its gods remain, adopted and renamed by the Akkadians, Babylonians and Assyrians. Its myths, of flood, of descent, of heroic kings, are copied, expanded and canonized. Its cities, though battered, continue as urban centres for centuries more. Even its writing system, cuneiform, endures long after its inventors are gone, used by scribes across Mesopotamia until nearly the time of Alexander the Great. So yes, Sumer falls, but it is not erased. It is absorbed, translated and reborn, its voice carried forward by those who conquer, but cannot forget. Beneath a coppery sun, the people of walk among the ruins of their greatness. The ziggurat still stands, scarred but proud. Its temple is empty now, the statue of Nana long since carted off by Elamite hands, but the stairs still echo beneath sandal-clad feet. A priest ascends not with offerings, but with memory. He pauses at the summit, eyes sweeping across the once glittering city now cloaked in silence. Somewhere below, a scribe etches a lament into wet clay, his hand trembling not with fear, but reverence. Does not die all at once. Even after its sacking, life stirs among its alleys and courtyards. Some citizens remain, patching walls, reopening markets, coaxing barley from the stubborn earth. The administrative heart may be broken, but the body continues to twitch, and is not alone. Across the southern plain, other cities, Lagash, Eridu, Nippur, likewise weather the storm. In the wake of the Third Dynasty's collapse, no single power fills the vacuum. Instead, city-states re-emerge, independent and cautious. Some are ruled by local dynasties, others by ambitious governors with delusions of grandeur. A few attempt temporary alliances, hoping to resist the encroaching forces gathering on every horizon. This is the Isin Lhasa period, a time of revival and rivalry. Isin, a northern city, claims to be the legitimate heir of Ur's fallen empire. Its rulers perform old rituals, restore temples, and continue the royal traditions in Sumerian, now more ceremonial than spoken. Lhasa, farther south, disagrees. Its rulers assert their own claim, and soon the two cities descend into a tug-of-war over land, loyalty, and religious legitimacy. Yet even as the political scene fragments, cultural memory coalesces. Scribes across Sumer continue to copy and curate. The temple schools are busy. The old hymns of Enheduanna are recopied. The Epic of Gilgamesh evolves into its standardized form. Legal codes are reviewed, debated, refined. Even now, generations after the death of Sumerian as a living tongue, scribes still study it, chant it, write in it. Sumerian becomes a scholarly language, reserved for theology, science, and sacred verse. Scribes are trained bilingually. They master Akkadian for administration and Sumerian for reverence. The training is arduous, filled with rote memorization, literary imitation, and scholarly exercises. But those who master it become the gatekeepers of civilization. It is these men, and a few rare women, who ensure that Sumer does not vanish beneath the dust. And what of the people? The average Sumerian, though now perhaps called an Akkadian or Amorite depending on dialect, lives much as before. They plant dates, brew beer, tend goats, and whisper old prayers at household shrines. They gather in marketplaces, tell jokes, argue over water rights, and complain about taxes. The gods still rule their world, even if the names atop temple ledgers have changed. At home, clay tablets still clutter shelves. Families keep records of inheritance, marriages, debts, and dreams. In many houses, small clay figurines of deities, Nana, Enlil, Inanna, still watch from wall niches, their presence a quiet defiance against forgetting. Yet, the world is changing. New powers rise along the edges of Mesopotamia. The Amorites, once nomadic, establish footholds in key cities. Hammurabi, an Amorite king, will soon rise in Babylon, a modest city north of Sumer proper, and carve out a new empire. His legal code, carved into basalt, borrows heavily from Ur-Nammu, but updates the laws with harsher punishments and clearer hierarchies. And yet, despite the new rulers, the new scripts, and the slow migration of power northward, Sumer's imprint remains. Babylon's temples are built in the style of Ur. Babylonian priests chant in Sumerian. Babylonian myths draw from Sumerian sources. Even Marduk, Babylon's patron god, borrows aspects from Enlil and Enki. The new world is not a break from the old, but its continuation. In the centuries to come, Assyria rises to power, then falls. Chaldeans, Persians, Greeks and Parthians rule these lands in turn. But Sumer, though invisible on maps, remains woven into the fabric of each. And in the ground, beneath crumbling cities, the clay waits. For over 2,000 years, no one reads the old script. Cuneiform tablets sit buried beneath layers of sand and mud. Temples collapse, ziggurats erode. Names like Uruk, Nippur, and Eridu fade into myth. The great cities of the south become mounds of dust, whispered about by shepherds and travellers, until the 19th century. Western explorers and local workers poking through the ruins of what they call Tel al-Muqayyar uncover strange bricks stamped with symbols. At first, these are curiosities, souvenirs, but slowly scholars begin to recognise patterns. These symbols aren't decoration, they're language, and the bricks, they speak. The decipherment of cuneiform is painstaking. Scholars compare tablets from different sites, working through lists of signs, trying to unlock the grammar. They compare names, look for repeated phrases, puzzle out the syntax. Slowly, painfully, the silent clay begins to speak, and what it says astonishes the world. It tells of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, of Inanna and her descent, of kings, laws, and merchants. It describes a people who invented cities, writing, and literature, not in service of conquest, but of memory. Not for glory, but for order, devotion, and curiosity. Archaeologists descend on Mesopotamia, excavating temples, palaces, and private homes. Thousands upon thousands of tablets emerge from the earth still legible. Some are poetry, others beer rations, some ancient school exercises, each one a fragment of a long-forgotten world. In museums across the globe, these tablets now sit under glass, mute but profound. Their wedge-shaped marks speak of a civilization that understood its own fragility and wrote anyway. And even now, scholars are still deciphering. Some tablets remain unread, others untranslated. Still more are broken, mere slivers of a story. But the work continues. Every fragment added to the archive brings Sumer back into focus, like a mosaic slowly reassembled. What began as scribbles in wet clay becomes a legacy of human thought, ambition, fear, and faith. It is not only a memory, it is a reminder that we build, that we fall, and that we try, however imperfectly, to leave something behind. So as night closes in over the ruins of Ur, and the stars reappear in their ancient constellations, the wind stirs the dust atop crumbling walls. A shepherd passes by with his flock. Somewhere a child plays near a forgotten brick. And beneath the surface, the clay waits, still bearing the marks of a civilization that, for all its distance in time, still whispers, "We were here." The great rivers no longer roar. They meander now, sluggish and braided, no longer feeding the arteries of the cities that once thrived between them. The canals, once alive with paddle strokes and shouting merchants, are choked with silt and weeds. Barley fields give way to saline flats. Goats refuse to graze where the soil has turned white and brittle. Something is fading, not in fire and conquest, but in a slow, quiet unravelling. Sumer is dying, not with drama, but with erosion, not with a fall, but a fading. By the middle of the second millennium BCE, the vibrant world of Sumerian civilization, its language, cities, rituals, and rhythms, has entered its final act. But this isn't a single moment. It's a process, one scholars still debate in detail, and locals perhaps hardly noticed as it happened. Like a dimming lamp, the end comes gradually, silently, until one day you realise the room is dark. The reasons are complex, layered like the strata of ruined ziggurats. First and foremost is the land itself. The Sumerians, master irrigators and canal builders, face an enemy of their own success. Over centuries of relentless farming and over-irrigation, salts accumulate in the soil. The Tigris and Euphrates carry mineral-rich waters. When these waters are spread across the land and evaporate beneath the blazing sun, they leave behind salt. The more irrigation, the more evaporation. The more evaporation, the more salt. And with salt, crops falter. Barley, the staple of the Sumerian diet and economy, is hardy. But even barley has its limits. As salinization worsens, yields plummet. Farmers abandon exhausted fields, pressing farther into marginal lands or leaving the south entirely. Tablets from later periods document this decline. Grain rations shrink, food imports rise, and once prosperous estates fall into disrepair. By the time Lhasa and Isin are vying for dominance, agriculture in much of southern Sumer is teetering. The cities depend increasingly on trade and tribute rather than local produce. Urban populations shrink. Villages are deserted. The countryside, once a checkerboard of farms, begins to blur into wilderness, and then there's the climate. Evidence suggests that a broader pattern of aridification strikes the Near East during this period. Rainfall lessens, river levels drop, canals clog with dust and sediment. Without regular flooding to renew the land, the entire system begins to crumble. This isn't merely inconvenient, it's catastrophic. In a land where every harvest depends on managing water with surgical precision, even slight climate shifts carry heavy consequences. Add to this the growing instability of the political map. New peoples enter Mesopotamia from all directions. The Amorites, who once trickled into Sumer as labourers, traders and mercenaries, now rule most major cities. Their dialect of Akkadian becomes dominant. In the north, Babylon emerges as a new power centre. In the east, Elam grows bold once more. And to the west, waves of nomadic tribes keep borders tense and trade routes fragile. The Sumerian language, already a scholarly holdover, becomes increasingly fossilised. By the first millennium BCE, it's no longer spoken at all. Priests and scribes continue to learn it, much as medieval scholars studied Latin, but only in temples and schools. In homes and markets, Akkadian reigns. Even the writing system shifts. Cuneiform, once a flexible and evolving script, hardens into standard forms. Scribes copy older works with reverence, not innovation. The creativity of earlier periods gives way to conservatism. Schools train scribes to memorize and replicate, not to experiment or question. The last living flickers of Sumerian thought dim beneath layers of rote repetition, and yet the people do not disappear. The descendants of Sumerians do not vanish into the ether, they intermarry, assimilate, adapt. Their gods remain, often under new names. Inanna becomes Ishtar. Enlil's authority is absorbed by Marduk. The myths survive, retold, reworded and woven into new cosmologies. Gilgamesh, that restless king, remains a literary icon for centuries. His epic is copied in Babylon, Ashur, Nineveh, even Ugarit. By the time it reaches the library of Ashurbanipal, it's been translated, edited and canonized. The flood story within it travels further still, echoing into the Hebrew Bible and beyond. Even as southern Mesopotamia falls into decline, the spirit of Sumer permeates the broader ancient world. Its influence is architectural, seen in the temples of Babylon, the stepped towers of Elam, the axis-aligned city plans of Hittite fortresses. Its influence is astronomical, preserved in Babylonian star charts, lunar calendars, and ephemerides, all rooted in Sumerian observations. Its influence is linguistic, etched into every surviving cuneiform text, where Sumerian loanwords and syntactic quirks persist like fossils in amber. And its influence is administrative, its systems of taxation, land division, legal structure, and record-keeping forming the template for every Mesopotamian state that follows. Still, the old cities grow quiet. Once the heart of empire becomes a provincial backwater. Nippur, once the spiritual centre of the land, continues as a religious site, but its temples decay. Eridu, oldest of them all, is eventually abandoned altogether, swallowed by encroaching marsh and time. Some cities, like Lagash, experience brief resurgences under later rulers. Neo-Sumerian kings like Gudea leave behind beautiful statues, detailed inscriptions, and impressive buildings. But these are last gasps. Sophisticated, yes, but not sustainable. The centres of gravity shift northward. By the time of the Assyrians and Neo-Babylonians, Sumer is a memory. A revered memory, but a memory nonetheless. It's difficult to pinpoint when Sumer truly ends. There's no singular date, no battle that closes the chapter. Instead, it's like watching a shoreline erode, grain by grain, until the shape is altered beyond recognition. But traces remain. In later Babylonian rituals, priests still use Sumerian chants. Astronomers still refer to Enlil zones and Anu stars. Royal inscriptions still mention Enki's wisdom and Nanna's light. Even as empires rise and fall, the Sumerian pantheon lingers like old royalty living quietly in the wings. And then, of course, there's the clay. For centuries these tablets lie buried beneath broken walls and wind-blown dust. They wait. The fire that destroyed buildings preserved the clay. What could have been lost becomes fossilized history. When Western archaeologists begin their excavations in the 19th century, they don't know what they're about to find. They unearth myths, hymns, tax ledgers, law codes, board games, medicine manuals, star charts, beer recipes, letters to kings, letters from lovers. A whole civilization, once thought lost, re-emerges, word by word. Today, in museums and libraries around the world, tens of thousands of these tablets rest behind glass, or in dusty drawers still being translated. Each one adds another layer to the story, another thread to the Sumerian tapestry. And even now, we're still catching up. New tablets are unearthed every year. Some are mundane, others reshape what we thought we knew. A missing line in a myth, a forgotten name, a tablet that turns out to be the earliest known use of a legal term or the first known instance of a riddle. Each discovery is another whisper from a civilization that never quite vanished. Sumer's decline, then, is not extinction. It is transformation, absorption, migration, and above all, it is survival, not of empire or kingship, but of ideas. The people who once coaxed barley from the riverbanks, who worshipped the night sky and feared the underworld, who carved their thoughts into clay and believed that memory was sacred. They may no longer walk those sun-baked streets, but their legacy does. It ripples forward in syllables and symbols, in laws and legends, in the very idea that to write something down is to defy death. As the salt spreads across the fields and the ziggurats crumble, Sumer itself becomes a story, one that the world will spend millennia trying to read. The air above the southern Mesopotamian plains carries more silence than sound now. Crickets chirp, wind lifts fine grains of dust into eddies that swirl between half-buried ruins. The outlines of once mighty ziggurats are barely visible against the soft hazy skyline. But beneath that earth, beneath centuries of silt and desiccation, a different kind of world persists, one built not from bricks or barley, but from myth. Because even as Sumer the civilization declines, Sumer the mythology begins to ascend. This mythology is not quaint folklore or rustic campfire stories. It is vast, layered, and deeply philosophical. It seeks not just to explain the world, but to locate humanity within it. And its reach, like the floodwaters of old, spreads far beyond its origins. At the heart of the Sumerian cosmos is a triad, An, Enlil, and Enki, and rules the heavens, distant and abstract. Enlil governs the air, the breath of life, and the force of storms. Enki dwells in the subterranean freshwater ocean called the Abzu, presiding over knowledge, magic, and creation. Each god has roles and stories that intersect, sometimes harmonize, and often contradict, because Sumerian myth isn't tidy. It's messy, like the people who told it. Creation begins not with a single god, but with a cosmic hierarchy. From the mingling of primeval waters, fresh and salt, emerges the universe. The gods are born from these waters, and with them, conflict. Generations of deities squabble, form councils, and eventually create humanity, not as a crowning achievement, but as a solution. Because the gods are tired. They have fields to till, temples to maintain, and too many divine chores. So they fashion humans from clay mixed with the blood of a rebellious deity, and in doing so, bind mankind to both the earth and divine rebellion. Humans are created not out of love, but necessity, a motif that echoes in later myths across cultures. From this origin unfolds a cascade of tales, of Inanna's daring descent into the underworld, of Enki's drunken gift-giving, of Gilgamesh's quest for immortality. Inanna, perhaps the most complex and electrifying deity in the Sumerian pantheon, embodies contradiction. She is love and war, fertility and chaos, seduction and wrath. Her descent to the netherworld is among the most famous myths. She strips herself of power at each gate of the underworld until she stands naked before her sister, Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. The myth reads like poetry but brims with tension. Inanna dies, she's hung on a hook, and while the world above withers, Enki intervenes. He creates genderless beings from dirt and life-giving water, who slip into the underworld unnoticed and persuade Ereshkigal to release her sister. It's a story of death and resurrection, of sacrifice and cosmic balance, and it predates other dying and rising god motifs by centuries. Then there is Gilgamesh, a king, a demigod, a tyrant, and a seeker. His epic, compiled over centuries, begins as a Sumerian cycle of poems before coalescing into the more familiar Akkadian version. But its roots are here, in Uruk, among scribes who first inked the name Gilgamesh into clay. his story is one of grief. When his friend Enkidu dies, struck down by divine wrath for killing the bull of heaven and insulting the gods, Gilgamesh is undone. He wanders the earth, searching for Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of the Great Flood, hoping to learn the secret of eternal life. What he finds instead is wisdom, that immortality belongs to the gods, that humans are fated to die, that what endures is not the flesh, but the name, the deeds, the story. And in that final truth, the Sumerians give us one of the earliest meditations on mortality, not with fear, but with acceptance. Life is fleeting. Cities rise and fall, but the clay remembers. These myths do more than entertain. They structure the Sumerian understanding of existence. The gods are not always just. The world is not always fair. But there is order. There are cycles, there are laws, divine and natural, that bind even the gods. The underworld, for instance, is not a place of torture, but of stillness. All souls go there, good and bad alike. It is dusty, dark, and inevitable. Offerings from the living help ease the spirit's burden, but they do not return. Even Inanna must leave someone behind in exchange for her resurrection. Her husband Dumuzi, who will now spend half the year below. This myth becomes seasonal, explaining the cycle of fertility and harvest. When Dumuzi is in the underworld, the land withers. When he returns, life blooms. It is agriculture as theology, and theology as narrative. Other myths explore cosmic administration. There's the Enuma Elish predecessor texts, in which Enki organises the world by assigning duties to gods and humans alike. Rivers are tamed, animals are named, cities are chosen as cult centres. Language and agriculture are divine decrees handed out like blueprints. One myth, Enki and the world order, reads like a bureaucratic checklist, with deities and regions receiving their divine roles from the god of wisdom. And in all of this, one finds an undercurrent of humility. The Sumerians knew they were part of something bigger. They did not place themselves at the centre of creation, but at the service of it. The gods are inscrutable, their moods volatile, but humans, though flawed and mortal, have their place, to build, to write, to remember. These stories echo forward. The flood narrative, Utnapishtim, building a boat to survive a divinely sent deluge, becomes Noah. The descent to the underworld becomes Persephone. The search for eternal life becomes countless quests from east to west. And yet the Sumerian versions are not primitive drafts. They are complete, rich, and emotionally complex. They stand on their own, not as precursors, but as pillars. Their preservation owes much to the scribes who copied and recopied the texts across centuries. These were not casual retellings, they were curriculum. Students learned Sumerian not just to calculate grain, but to read myth. They copied lines like sacred chants, ensuring that Inanna's journey, Gilgamesh's grief, and Enki's cleverness survived dynasties and dust. Even Babylonian kings had their children educated in Sumerian myths. They saw these stories not as foreign but foundational, cultural inheritance inscribed on clay, and so it is that Sumer lives, not just in architecture, law, or farming, but in the stories we still tell. The god who dies and rises, the king who seeks immortality, the lovers who descend into shadow. These are not just Sumerian tales, they are human tales, recast and retold, but rooted in Uruk and Ur, in dusty classrooms and temple libraries. They whisper across time, carried on the breath of storytellers, and every time we write them down, recite them aloud, or feel the sting of Gilgamesh's tears as he mourns his friend, we keep Sumer alive, not as a ruin, but as a voice. The final layers of dust are thin now. The winds have calmed, the scribes have laid down their styluses, and the firelight flickers against the baked brick walls one last time. The story of Sumer is nearly done, not with a bang, but with a sigh, drawn out over millennia and echoed through every culture that came after. In this twilight, we begin to reflect not just on what Sumer built or believed, but on how it shaped the very idea of civilization. It begins, as it always has, with the cities, Uruk, where the first true urban life took hold, where Gilgamesh ruled, and where ziggurats pierced the sky like steps toward the divine. Nippur, sacred to Enlil, the storm god, where rituals of kingship affirmed the cosmic order. Eridu, mythic and ancient, the first city according to Sumerian tradition, resting beside the sea before it receded. These cities are not random. They are purposeful, laid out with care, aligned to cardinal points, filled with canals, courtyards, temples, workshops. They are laboratories of human potential and fragility, and their evolution lays the groundwork for every city that follows. But urban design is only the framework. The real brilliance of Sumer lies in the web of systems they created, systems still pulsing beneath the skin of modern life. Their invention of writing, cuneiform, begins as an accounting tool, little pictographs on clay to track goods, but soon it grows. It records not just numbers, but names, prayers, myths, dreams. The written word, born from bureaucracy, is hijacked by poetry, and once it is written, it can be remembered, transmitted, questioned, improved. The very concept of law, too, finds early expression in Sumer. From the codes of Urukagina to Ur-Nammu, these laws are not just decrees, they are philosophies. They define rights and responsibilities, they regulate trade, they offer recourse for injustice. And while later law codes, like Hammurabi's, are more famous, they build upon Sumerian foundations. Mathematics thrives here as well. Sumerians use a sexagesimal system, base 60, which explains why we still divide hours into 60 minutes and circles into 360 degrees. Their calendars, based on lunar cycles, evolve into complex astronomical observations. Their scholars chart Venus, name constellations, and calculate eclipses with startling accuracy. Their obsession with the heavens isn't superstition, it's systemization. They even flirt with medicine and diagnostics. Clay tablets preserve early medical texts, herbal remedies, surgical techniques, incantations for healing. Illness is both physical and spiritual, and they try to treat both. Diagnoses are recorded with clinical detachment. If the fever rises in the afternoon and the pulse is strong, the illness is within the liver. It's rudimentary, yes, but it's observation-based. And then, of course, there's education. Sumerian scribal schools, adubas, train boys, and occasionally girls, to become the architects of memory. They learn by rote, copying tablets line by line, memorizing vast catalogues of signs. They chant proverbs, solve math problems, write essays on ethics. These schools are rigorous and exhausting, but they are also the crucibles of Sumerian culture. Without them, the myths wouldn't survive. The hymns wouldn't echo, the law wouldn't endure, but education also shapes thought. Scribes become thinkers. They don't just record, they interpret, they comment, they innovate within their narrow frameworks. And over generations, this education system evolves into a kind of proto-humanism, a belief in the value of knowledge, language, and legacy. Sumer also gives us the first known debates between opposing perspectives. Take The Debate Between Sheep and Grain, a delightful and surprisingly sophisticated poem where the two agricultural staples argue over which is more important. They appeal to the gods. They cite economic benefits. The text even has a judge, Enlil, who ultimately sides with grain. But the brilliance lies in the structure: thesis, antithesis, judgment. This dialectical format becomes a mainstay of intellectual traditions to come. The Sumerians didn't just farm and build, they debated, they imagined, they personified their dilemmas and let them speak. Even their religion, often misunderstood as mere polytheism, is complex and dynamic. Their gods represent forces of nature and human experience, but they're not all-powerful. They argue, fail, change their minds. Humans interact with them not just through sacrifice, but through negotiation, trickery, devotion, and dreams. The divine isn't static, it's conversational. Temples are more than places of worship. They are economic centres, banks, schools, and food distributors. The temple staff is enormous. Priests, scribes, guards, cooks, weavers, musicians. The divine economy is very real. And in this sacred context, Sumerian culture develops a unique relationship with time. Their literature reflects an acute awareness of the past. Kings write not only to boast, but to connect themselves to those who came before. I rebuilt the temple of Enlil as my ancestor did. Time is cyclical, but also cumulative. It's memory in motion. Their laments, composed in the face of ruin, are not just mourning songs. They are deliberate attempts to make sense of catastrophe. Why did the gods abandon us? What did we do wrong? And can we be forgiven? These are questions every civilization faces. Sumer faces them first and records them. Their laments also serve another purpose, continuity. By mourning they preserve. By writing, they defy oblivion, and through this defiance we hear them still. Because Sumer doesn't end, not really. Its name may fade from local memory, its language may become ceremonial, but its DNA remains embedded in every society that comes after. Babylon borrows its gods, its script, its laws. Assyria militarizes its bureaucracy. Persia absorbs its calendar. Greece inherits its myths in altered forms. Rome perfects its legalism. Islam builds cities atop its ruins. The West, in time, rediscovers its tablets, its epics, its brilliance. And today, the Sumerian system of timekeeping ticks in every digital clock. The zodiac symbols trace lines first drawn by Sumerian hands. The ideas of writing, schooling, measurement, even the concept of civilization, urban life organised by law and record, owe a debt to a people who carved their legacy into mud. We may never know the name of the first scribe who shaped a reed and made a mark, or the midwife who whispered to Inanna as she delivered a baby in Eridu, or the farmer who scowled at a salt-drenched field and tried once again to plant barley. But we know they lived. We know they thought, loved, feared, wondered, and laughed. And that is the gift of Sumer. Not perfection, not eternity, but the courage to create, to organise the chaos, to tell the story, to build something, however fragile, that outlasts the builder. So, as the last lamp is extinguished, and the final tablet tucked into its clay envelope, let us remember what they tried to say. We are here. We mattered. And maybe, just maybe, you will remember us. And so, night settles gently over the ancient plains. The stars, once charted by priest astronomers from ziggurat rooftops, now shimmer in silence. The great rivers murmur softly through the reeds, their courses altered by time, yet still flowing, still whispering secrets in the dark. A breeze rustles through forgotten ruins, through temples and alleyways where sandals once shuffled, prayers once echoed. The story of Sumer lingers, not as a headline or a monument, but as a breath, a long, slow exhale that carries the weight of everything they dreamed, built, wrote, and believed. They were never immortal, they never claimed to be, but they etched their voices into clay with the quiet confidence that someone someday might listen. And we have. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and the rhythm of the day recedes, let their echoes lull you. Let the images drift. A scribe bent over a tablet, the hum of a hymn beneath a temple's dome, a child chasing a goat through sunlit fields. Let the weight of time soften, the sharp lines blur, and the past fold gently into the present. The Sumerians are not gone. They're just sleeping, beneath museum glass, beneath desert sands, beneath the surface of every story ever told. Close your eyes. The stars above are the same. The river still winds, and in some quiet corner of the cosmos, a clay tablet rests, waiting for a new reader. Sleep well, dream deep, and remember, even the oldest stories are never truly finished.